Hey everyone, welcome back. If possible, you can support me via PayPal or become a channel member to help me keep this channel running. Thank you. Now let's get back to the story of Sword of Coming audio series. Chapter 991. Unable to be expressed. Good, Ma Kuxuan said as he stood up and dusted off his hands. In that case, I'll go back on my word just this once. From now on, you will be an esteemed guest of mine anytime you decide to visit. After that, Ma Kuxuan began walking along the bank of the Dragon Whisker River, intentionally releasing his aura instead of continuing to conceal it. Before long, a clump of waterweeds appeared in the river, gently swaying in the water as if it were observing the young man on the riverbank. The old woman, whose appearance had been rejuvenated, poked her head timidly out of the water, seemingly too afraid to approach Ma Kuxuan. River deities were incapable of shedding tears, but she was still habitually wiping at her cheeks. This was the first time that Shudian had seen such a vibrant smile on Ma Kuxuan's face. And it was also only now that she discovered that even someone as cold and heartless as him was capable of shedding tears. On that day, Ma Kuxuan sat down at the riverbank beside the woman, who gently held onto his hands while speaking to him in a kind and gentle voice. All Ma Kuxuan did for a long time was sit in silence. The woman's physical appearance had become rather unfamiliar to him, but her all-too-familiar nagging felt very much like home. His grandmother spoke to him about a bunch of trivial nonsense and also badmouthed a bunch of people who had wronged her, but in the end, she told him that he didn't need to do anything for her sake. After a long conversation, she instructed her grandson to wait for her for a moment while she made a trip back to her shabby underwater abode before returning with all of the assets that she had painstakingly accumulated. She set everything down between herself and Ma Kuxuan, then introduced the items to him one by one before asking him to take all of it with him. She told him that this was the betrothal gift that she had saved up for her precious grandson, and she asked him if there were girls that he fancied. At the same time, she expressed her vehement disapproval of Jigui, denouncing her as a toxic vixen who was not to be touched. Aside from her, she was willing to accept any other girl as her granddaughter-in-law. Ma Kuxuan told her that he only had eyes for Jigui. The woman habitually raised a finger to give him a disapproving prod on the forehead, telling him that he was an incorrigible fool, and that he deserved to suffer for refusing to heed the wisdom of his elders. As the conversation continued, the woman began to cry, telling Ma Kuxuan about how much she had suffered in order to become a river guardian, and that if it weren't for the thought that her death would leave her precious grandson all alone in the world, she truly wouldn't have been able to endure the suffering. Ma Kuxuan was also brought to the point of tears as he heaved a forlorn sigh. The woman implored Ma Kuxuan to promise her something, but Ma Kuxuan reassured her that her concerns were unnecessary. He told her that if Chen Pingan were to trace the leads back to the Ma clan of Apricot Blossom Alley, then for each person that he dared to kill, Ma Kuxuan would kill 2 people that Chen Pingan cared about the most. However, the woman refused to accept this, insisting that Ma Kuxuan make her a promise. In her eyes, Ma Kuxuan's parents were irreplaceable, and the loss of their lives was not something that he could make up for simply by returning the favor twice over to Chen Pingan. Ma Kuxuan refused to answer. In the end, the woman pulled out her trump card, telling him that she would reject him as a grandson if he refused to comply. Ma Kuxuan could only go along with her wishes, but deep down, he knew that the promise was an empty one. This was why he had gone to the Yang family's medicine shop instead of going to his parents after parting ways with his grandmother last time. It was only after learning that his grandmother had to remain in the Dragon Whisker River that he had no choice but to change his mind, instructing his parents to sell their ancestral dragon kiln before moving away from the Dragon Spring Prefecture. Thus began the long journey away from home. On the way here, Shudian noticed something rather strange. For some reason, Ma Kuxuan didn't seem to have had the best relationship with his parents. It wasn't the type of distant aloofness often seen in lofty immortals. Instead, it felt like he had simply never developed much of a bond with them, even from a young age, and after he embarked on his cultivation journey, they had only grown even more distant over time. As for his parents, they seemed to have been basking in some type of immense joy this entire time. It felt like they didn't find their son's cold demeanor toward them strange or disheartening at all. Instead, it was like this was the norm for them. Among the two, Ma Kuxuan's father was always dressed in rather lavish attire, and he seemed very capable and professional, like a shrewd businessman. As for his wife, she had a pair of peach blossom eyes, and her appearance wasn't anything special. Whenever she gazed upon someone, there was always an air of coldness about her, even when she had a smile on her face. On the way here, all of the people and spirits that had been foolish enough to get in their way had been killed. On many occasions, it felt like Ma Kuxuan had intentionally chosen to take more treacherous and perilous routes in order to encounter more bandits and malicious spirits that he could kill as a means of venting his frustrations. During this period, cultivators from her clan came to rescue her for the second time. The first time, the founder of her sect had personally arrived with a group of disciples to confront Ma Kuxuan. There had been around a dozen of them, and they had all been killed by Ma Kuxuan as easily as if he were crushing a cluster of ants. Prior to killing them, Ma Kuxuan made Shudian make her second choice between whether she wanted to live, or if she wanted those who had come to save her to die. If she answered incorrectly, then she had to die. She had given the right answer, so those people had died in her place. On this occasion, her senior brother, who was a prospective Dao partner candidate of hers, had led the rescue party, arriving with some of his friends from the cultivation world to try and save her. Once again, Ma Kuxuan asked her to make a choice between life and death, and once again she chose to live. Thus, her senior brother and his friends were all killed right before her very eyes. At the time, it had been pouring with rain, and Shudian had collapsed to the ground in a state of severe mental anguish as she loudly asked why Ma Kuxuan had denied her when she chose death the first time, only to then go along with her wishes on the two subsequent occasions. Ma Kuxuan had been standing under the pelting rain, but his robe remained completely dry as he smiled and answered, "My goal from the very beginning was to make you suffer a fate worse than death. Is that so difficult to understand? What you don't understand is why a supposed celestial maiden like you has to now sit in the mud and wail like a pitiful dog. Whenever you come to understand the nature of your situation, you'll be able to let go of the past and lead a happy and carefree life." He then grabbed her by the head before throwing her onto the back of her horse. "I will not tolerate any further disrespect from you. So make this the last time that you display insubordination to me. If you do this again, I will cut off your tongue." From there, the convoy continued onward through the rain. It was a warm and pleasant day in late spring. Ma Kuxuan was at the forefront of the convoy, swaying casually on the back of his steed, mentally going through a list of the cultivators of the upper 5 tiers on the eastern treasured Vile continent. First, he thought of Imperial Preceptor Cui Chan of the Great Li Empire. In his eyes, Cui Chan was a brilliant and capable man. Then there was the leading figure of that Mahist branch, who had been hiding in the capital of the Great Li Empire for all these years. He had managed to outlast the cultivator from the naturalist Lu clan, biding his time until the latter passed away, and that was a rather impressive feat in itself. Ma Kuxuan had personally witnessed the so-called 12 mountain ships before. They were truly gargantuan ships that seemed to take up the entire sky, casting such enormous shadows onto everything beneath them that it felt as if the areas they loomed over had been plunged into the darkness of night. They were the fundamental reason why the Great Li Empire's forces had been able to complete such a rapid southward expansion. The construction of every single one of those giant ships had been like a large chunk of meat sliced off the body of the emperor and the imperial court of the Great Li Empire, and on top of that, the Imperial Song clan still owed the main branch of Moism on the Middle-earth Divine Continent a huge debt, as well as the commercialists and various other powerful figures on the Middle-earth Divine Continent. The Great Li Empire's forces had been desperately gathering spoils wherever they went during the course of their southward expansion in order to pay off these debts. But it was difficult to say how long that was going to take. The wandering Mahist hero by the name of Su Rua was not to be underestimated. Heavenly Lord Xieshur of the Northern Complete Reed continent had already departed. There would have been no point for him to continue to remain on the Eastern Treasured Vile continent, and apparently, he had a crisis to attend to back home, so he would have been made a laughingstock had he not returned to the Northern Complete Reed continent when he did. As for the rest of them, their existence didn't really seem to matter at all. If they died, then their spiritual energy would return to heaven and earth, and while they lived, they were stingy misers who only knew how to take from the world and never gave anything back. Heavenly Lord Qizhan of the Divine Edict sect couldn't even keep a disciple as blessed by fortune as he Xiaoyang. Even in the worst-case scenario, surely he could have broken all of her limbs and imprisoned her just to ensure that her fortune remained in the sect. The lower sect of the Jade Tablet sect, the True Realm sect, had just conquered Bamboo Scroll Lake and was at the height of its powers. Despite this, sect leader Jiang Shangzhen was taking a very shrewd approach by willingly placing himself and his sect below others. Whenever the disciples of his sect got into conflicts with others, he was always ready to admit fault regardless of the reason for the conflict, and the disciple would be punished accordingly. On many occasions, he took the initiative to offer up the heads of the offending disciples to the conflicting factions, and in doing so, he had spared the sect a great deal of trouble. Lu Laoqing of Palace Willow Island was an unpolished jade tier cultivator, and Lu Jimao had also recently made a breakthrough, becoming the second vagrant cultivator of the upper 5 tiers. Of course, he was now technically an official immortal of the True Realm sect. The old ancestor of the Wind Snow Temple, with the childlike appearance, hadn't left his sect for the past several centuries, but he had made an appearance during the conflict between Sun Scorch Mountain and the Wind Lightning Field. The female cultivator of True Martial Mountain had been even more reclusive than the old ancestor of True Martial Mountain, but her many disciples had been very active in the border forces of the Great Li Empire. There was also the leader of the Cloud Forest Zhang clan, as well as the first ever deity of the upper 5 tiers in the history of the Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, Weibo of Cloud Drape Mountain. The upper 5-tier swordsman of the luminous Vermilion Empire was yet to make an appearance, and it was unclear whether he had died in seclusion or was biding his time in preparation to make a return in the future. As for the storyteller from the Great Sway Nation, he was currently a prisoner on Cloud Drape Mountain, protecting the prince of the Gao clan. Ma Kuxuan didn't want to speak of the old storyteller, but objectively speaking, what did he have left aside from his unpolished jade tier cultivation base? Finally, Ma Kuxuan thought of Chen Pingan, and he opened his eyes as he interlaced his fingers with a contemplative look on his face. It was funny to him that all those of a similar age to himself that he had encountered since leaving the small town felt so inept. Even after traveling so far away from home, this hometown rival of his remained the only opponent that was capable of evoking some interest in him. He wondered if he would have to go all out in their next clash. The answer is probably still no. With that, he lost interest and he closed his eyes again and began thinking of the top prodigies on the Middle-earth divine continent. As for the maidservant behind him, there would come a day when she came to realize that she no longer desired vengeance. Instead, she would earnestly wish to remain by Ma Kuxuan's side, realizing that it would be the only safe refuge for her in the world. Once that time came, it would be about time for her to die. Ma Kuxuan would spare a part of her soul and her memories, then use a long-lost secret technique that even the old ancestors of True Martial Mountain couldn't master to find her incarnation in her next life. Once the time was right, he would return her memories to her, making it so that she would be tormented lifetime after lifetime with no hope of ever breaking out of the dreadful cycle. Lifetime after lifetime, she would be reincarnated as a human, only to be made to wish that she had never been born. If Chen Pingan dared to come after him for vengeance, then he would suffer an even worse fate than her. However, he wasn't going to do anything before Chen Pingan came to seek out revenge. After all, the Ma clan was at fault in their initial conflict. Ma Kuxuan was certainly no saint, but he was also not so depraved that he would go around killing those who didn't deserve death. However, there was no lack of people in this world who went out seeking death, and if he ran into such individuals, then he would gladly send them on. On Downtrodden Mountain, Pei Qian had woken up bright and early and packed up all of her belongings. She was about to go on a long journey. The day before, Cui Chang had told her, "Grab your little bamboo bookcase and hiking pole, we're going back to your hometown. Don't worry, just treat it like a sightseeing trip with me. Your training can come later." At the time, Pei Qian had barged onto the second floor of the bamboo building, determined to provoke Cui Chang into giving her another beating as she yelled, "What's going on today, old man Cui? Are you feeling feeble because you didn't have enough to eat?" She was going to be beaten anyway, so she may as well talk some trash while she was at it. However, to her surprise, Cui Chang had invited her on this sightseeing trip instead of administering her usual beating. Pei Qian was rather taken aback by this and she replied, "Even though the old cook is gone, we still have Nuanshu cooking for us, don't we? Besides, it's not like I took your bowl of rice at the table earlier." Cui Chang was almost unable to suppress the urge to give her another solid beating. Recently, Cui Chang would often come down from the second floor of the bamboo building, And he would also join everyone to eat at the table. Scram! Chui Cheng snapped. Pei Qian's eyes began darting around frantically, and only after stalling for a long while did she finally swagger her way out of the bamboo building. Standing in the walkway, she placed her hands on her hips as she yelled, "Zhou Mili!" Zhou Mili was sitting beside the staircase on the first floor, and she immediately rushed over to the foot of the bamboo building before asking, "How come I didn't hear you howling in pain today? What do you think?" Pei Qian sneered as she crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow. "Once you enter the second floor, there's only one way you could possibly return unscathed." Zhou Mili's face puckered up in a thoughtful manner as several options raced through her mind, and she asked, "Did we spike his rice with laxatives? How come I don't know about this? Did you assign the task of spiking his food to Nuanshu? But that doesn't make sense. Such a task should be left to me, the right-hand guardian of Downtrodden Mountain." Pei Qian immediately jumped down from the second floor, then hurriedly clamped a hand down onto Zhou Mili's head. With a flick of her wrist, Zhou Mili began spinning on the spot like a spinning top. Seemingly amused by this, Zhou Mili began spinning on the spot of her own volition even after her rotational momentum had run out. Pei Qian joined her middle and index fingers, then thrust them forward as she commanded, "Stop!" Zhou Mili immediately became completely still, her eyes wide and unblinking. Pei Qian's fingers remained extended as she made a hand seal with her other hand and nodded to herself with a pleased expression. As expected, this immobilizing spell of mine is as potent as ever. Even the great water demon of Mute Lake cannot remain unsusceptible. Zhou Mili still didn't dare to move, but her eyes were glowing brighter with excitement on Pei Qian's behalf. Pei Qian was very pleased, and she casually undid the immobilizing spell. Zhou Mili hurriedly began applauding vigorously in excitement as she praised, "That was amazing. I seriously couldn't move just now." On this day, Pei Qian and Zhou Mili sought out Chen Rushu to play, and the three girls quickly began chirping excitedly with one another like a nest of orioles. The entire day passed by in a flash. In the morning, not only had Chen Rushu and Zhou Mili arrived, but Zheng Dafeng and Chen Lingjun were also present. Zheng Dafeng stood in an expressionless manner, looking less than enthusiastic. Meanwhile, Chen Lingjun took a glance at Chui Cheng before averting his gaze, then made his way over to the cliff to stare off into the distance on his own. Chui Cheng turned to Zheng Dafeng and said, "Tell Julien that he did well to reject that half of the martial fortune." Zheng Dafeng was holding a parasol leaf umbrella and he grinned, "If he doesn't want it, then he can give it to me." Chui Cheng lashed out with an exasperated kick, but it wasn't very fast, and even the crippled Zheng Dafeng was able to evade it with ease. Pei Qian was standing off to the side with her bamboo sword and bamboo saber strapped to her waist, showing off her saber sword cross. She was also holding her hiking pole with her little bamboo bookcase on her back. On this day, Chui Cheng was wearing a Confucian robe. Pei Qian had seen him in this type of attire before, but for some reason, it felt particularly alien on this day. "I bet you didn't know that I was once an intellectual, and quite an accomplished one at that," Chui Cheng said with a smile. "In my younger days, I was one of the top scholars of our Eastern Treasured Vile continent." "Did you give yourself that title?" Pei Qian asked. Chui Cheng raised an eyebrow, and Pei Qian immediately corrected herself, loudly yelling, "Surely not. I'm sure it was a widely accepted fact across both the cultivation world and the mortal world of the Eastern Treasured Vile continent." Zheng Dafeng heaved an internal sigh as he declared, "A suitable location has been selected in accordance with your wishes, Senior Chui. We will start in the mountains deep in the wilderness on the westernmost border of the southern garden nation." Chui Cheng nodded in response, then turned to Pei Qian as he asked, "Are you ready to go?" Pei Qian gave a firm nod, holding her hiking pole in an extremely firm grip as she replied in a trembling voice, "Somewhat." In the end, the two of them sprang up into the air before descending onto a secluded mountain summit. Pei Qian's complexion was slightly pale. "You won't be so scared once we've completed this journey," Chui Cheng said with a reassuring smile. "Trust me. I ain't scared." Pei Qian scoffed as she thrust the butt of her hiking pole firmly into the ground. "In that case, can you put away the talismans hidden up your sleeve?" Chui Cheng asked as he cast his gaze into the distance. Pei Qian did as she was told in a subtle fashion, pretending not to have heard anything. The two of them made their way down the mountain on foot. Initially, Pei Qian was still rather uneasy, but she was accustomed to traversing mountain paths, and as she walked along, she felt like there really wasn't anything for her to fear. At least not for now. They were still very far away from the capital of the Southern Garden Nation. At the moment, they were still making their way through what was once the lotus flower-blessed land, and technically speaking, they weren't even actually on the territory of the Southern Garden Nation yet. That day, at around dusk, Pei Qian had already returned to her usual routine of cooking up some rice and a small pot of fish soup. There was a river at the foot of the mountain, and Pei Qian shaved off the tip of a bamboo pole, then tied a line and a hook to it before making a cast. From there, she crouched silently by the river, and once a fish had completely chomped down onto the hook, she gave her rod a vicious tug to pull the fish out of the water. At the time, Cui Chang had been looking upon her thick fishing rod with an exasperated expression. It was an extremely barbaric method of fishing that required no skill or finesse at all. However, he was hardly going to complain as he guzzled down bowlfuls of fish soup. It was a little salty for his taste, but when Pei Qian asked him whether the fish soup was to his liking, he lied and told her that it was fine. In Pei Qian's mind, fish soup and rice complemented each other perfectly, and she mixed the two together for a delicious, savory meal. She was squatting on the ground, bobbing up and down with joy as she ate, and Cui Chang couldn't be bothered to educate her on table manners. It wasn't like he was Chen Pingan. If Chen Pingan dared to educate her on trivial nonsense like this going forward, Cui Chang felt like he would be unable to suppress the urge to scold him a little, something along the lines of, "So what if you're her master? That doesn't give you the right to lecture her about every little thing. She's still just a little girl." A self-deprecating smile then appeared on his face as he urged in a gentle voice, "Slow down. No one's going to try to take your food from you." Pei Qian did as she was told, eating more slowly and meticulously than before. After cleaning up the bowls, chopsticks, and the clay pot that she used to cook her fish soup, she picked up the kettle before pouring out some water to wash her hands. After that, she put everything neatly back into her little bamboo bookcase before pulling out some paper and writing utensils. From there, she began meticulously making transcriptions while using her bamboo bookcase as a makeshift desk. Cui Chang was sitting off to the side and he smiled as he said, "You don't have to make your transcriptions here. If your master scolds you for it, just tell him that you had my approval." Pei Qian carefully finished transcribing the sentence that she was on, and only then did she turn to Cui Chang with a displeased glare as she snapped, "That's nonsense." Cui Chang could only shake his head in exasperated amusement. By the time Pei Qian completed her transcriptions, it was already quite dark, and she carefully packed away her writing supplies. With her eyes, she could actually see perfectly well in the dark. Cui Chang appeared to have been taking a nap, so Pei Qian picked up her hiking pole before sneaking her way to the distant mountain summit to practice her deranged demon sword techniques. If you're going to practice your sword techniques, then why not use that bamboo sword of yours? Cui Chang asked with a smile. Pei Qian stopped in her tracks as she loudly replied, "I'm imitating my master. He never uses his sword unless it's necessary. You wouldn't understand. Honestly, I don't really understand either. In any case, I can't go wrong by copying him." "What if your master is wrong?" Cui Chang asked. "How could master possibly teach me the wrong thing? There's no way he could ever be wrong. Even if he's wrong, I won't think he's wrong, and none of you can change my mind." Pei Qian continued practicing her deranged demon sword techniques as she spoke, and the swishing sound of her sword made her voice sound rather muffled and indistinct, but thankfully, Cui Chang was still able to hear her clearly. Cui Chang didn't speak any further as he smiled and closed his eyes to rest. At around midnight, Cui Chang roused Pei Qian from her slumber. She woke up with a pair of bleary eyes but didn't complain. She was already accustomed to traversing through the wilderness in the night. While descending the mountain, Pei Qian was carrying a ridiculously bulky fishing rod. "Are you not tired of carrying that thing on your back?" Cui Chang asked. "I am," she immediately complained in a pitiable manner, and it seemed that she was waiting for Cui Chang to ask her that exact question. "Don't expect me to carry it for you," Cui Chang scoffed. "I'm not so shameless like you." Pei Qian heaved a forlorn sigh, then asked Cui Chang to wait for her for a moment. She removed the fishing line from the rod along with the hook before placing them into a small pouch in her bamboo bookcase. After that, she picked up the fishing rod before hurling it through the air, and it was nailed straight into a large tree in the distance. Due to the fact that they were constantly traveling along the river, the 2 meals for the following day also consisted of rice and fish soup. As he sipped on some fish soup, Chui Cheng asked, "If we continue to travel along the river, are we going to have to eat this every day? What else do you want? You should be content that we have anything to eat at all." Pei Qian scoffed with a roll of her eyes. "Back when I was traveling the world with Master, it was just us two, and the old cook wasn't with us. That was a really grueling journey. Master was testing me at the time. This was before he officially made me his first ever disciple. Master is an exceptional fisherman, but I'm much worse at fishing. One time I was truly starving, and my master didn't call me over to have food with him, so I thought of an idea. Can you guess what it was? Was it to beg Chen Pingan to spare you some food?" Chui Cheng chuckled. Pei Qian scoffed. "Of course not. What I did was go to a murky river that wasn't very deep. The water was only around waist-high for me, and I dove in before reaching my arm into a gap in the rocks. I was able to grab onto a huge catfish the length of my arm. It was really aggressive, and it bit down onto my arm and wouldn't let go. I hurriedly resurfaced, then ran onto the shore and had to swing my arm forcefully over and over again before I finally managed to dislodge the catfish and slam it onto the ground. At the time, my master was astonished, and he called me a genius for coming up with such a brilliant plan." "What a load of nonsense," Chui Cheng chuckled. Pei Qian's shoulders instantly fell in a deflated manner as she conceded. "All right, I'll admit that Master didn't actually call me a genius. All he did was look at me." Back then, Pei Qian had put on a very courageous display, hiding her injured arm behind herself as she glowered intently at Chen Pingan. "But I really did catch that huge catfish. I'm not lying about that," Pei Qian insisted. She was worried that Chui Cheng still wouldn't believe her, so she quickly rolled up her sleeve to show him her arm, only for a frustrated look to appear on her face as she grumbled, "Shoot! I forgot that the scar had already disappeared." However, a wide smile then appeared on her face as she continued, "Thank heavens Master went to pick up some medicinal herbs for me at the time. He crushed it into a pulp before applying it to my arm, and the injury immediately stopped hurting. Isn't that strange? Isn't that amazing? I bet you're astonished." Chui Cheng nodded with a smile. As they continued on their journey, Pei Qian kept up with her daily transcriptions and sword technique practice, while Chui Cheng merely served as her guide. On this day, Chui Cheng was watching Pei Qian skip stones across the river when he casually asked, "What's something that you've heard that's made you feel the saddest?" Pei Qian pretended not to have heard him, so Chui Cheng repeated the question. Pei Qian crouched down by the water as she replied, "I can think of 2 occasions. Once was in the inn on the border of the Great Quan Empire on the Parasol Leaf continent. At the time Master didn't actually say anything to me, but I got really sad just from him looking at me. The second time was when I was with the big white goose. He asked me if I would only be willing to start training martial arts once my master died. That also made me really sad, and I couldn't sleep that night." Chui Cheng didn't say anything. It seemed that recalling these memories had put Pei Qian in a rather somber mood, but before long, she became distracted as she plucked up a pair of weeds from the riverbank, then began playing with them as if they were a pair of fighters locked in combat. As they continued on their journey, human settlements gradually began to appear. Chui Cheng continued to lead Pei Qian through the wilderness, and standing before a sheer cliff face, he clasped his hands behind his back as he turned to Pei Qian and said, "We've been traversing through the wilderness on foot this entire time. How would you like to experience what it's like to truly vault over mountains and valleys? Do you have the courage?" "You bet I do," Pei Qian replied in a confident manner as she plastered a talisman to her own forehead. A brave martial artist like myself can only be limited by the extent of her capabilities, not the extent of her courage. Instead of taking flight, Chui Cheng began climbing his way up the cliff face, and Pei Qian followed along behind him. Upon reaching the mountain summit, they were close to 10 kilometers away from the nearest mountain. "Hold on tight to your hiking pole and bamboo bookcase," Chui Cheng warned with a smile, and before Pei Qian had a chance to ask any questions, he grabbed her by the shoulder before hurling her through the air. All of a sudden, Pei Qian found herself soaring through the heavens, and she was momentarily paralyzed with fear. However, she quickly grew accustomed to the sensation, and she let loose an exultant cry as she began scrambling with her hands and feet, as if she were performing an aerial doggy paddle. She looked down at the mountains and rivers beneath her feet, and it occurred to her that there was nothing for her to fear. Right as she was about to crash into the mountain up ahead, she gently adjusted her breathing, then spread out her body in midair, adjusting her posture to manipulate her positioning. From there, she planted her feet against a huge tree, then bent her knees and curled up into a ball to absorb her momentum. The entire tree was snapped upon impact, while Pei Qian gently drifted down onto the ground. Cui Chang was already standing beside her, and he challenged, "Let's see who can reach the summit first." Pei Qian immediately began sprinting up the mountain like a plume of smoke, but Cui Chang maintained a consistent lead of 50 to 60 feet on her, ensuring that she could still see him, but could never catch up to him. The two of them made a beeline straight up the mountain, and whenever they encountered a section with no traversable path ahead, Cui Chang would hurl Pei Qian through the air. Before long, Pei Qian had grown so accustomed to soaring through the heavens that she was even able to practice her deranged demon sword techniques while in the air. One night, the two of them arrived at the foot of a renowned mountain in the territory of the Southern Garden Nation's Western Mountain. "Can you throw me up there?" Pei Qian asked with an eager look of excitement in her eyes. Cui Chang smiled as he replied, "We should walk. Scholars should be respectful of the mountains." "That's true," Pei Qian mused with a nod. Cui Chang led Pei Qian onto the steps leading up the mountain, and the latter began scaling the steps while gently tapping them with her hiking pole as she smiled and remarked, "These are just like the steps on our downtrodden mountain. All of the scenery under the heavens looks similar if you don't look closely," Cui Chang replied. Pei Qian nodded in response and committed that phrase to memory. She felt like it was something that she could spout to show off in the future. At the very least, it'll surely be enough to win her the admiration of Zhou Mili. Cui Chang slowly made his way up the mountain, then looked around as he recited a poetry phrase. Mountains resembling sharp dragon scales and valleys filled with birds of flight. Even a 100-year-old man would be mesmerized by such a stunning sight. "Well said," Pei Qian praised with a nod. "Since when were you an appreciator of poetry?" Cui Chang asked with a smile. "I said that on my master's behalf," Pei Qian replied with a grin, and Cui Chang burst into laughter. Upon reaching the mountain summit, they arrived before a Taoist temple with its gates tightly shut. Instead of knocking on the gates, Cui Chang and Pei Qian explored the nearby area, reading some plaque inscriptions and cliff carvings. Cui Chang cast his gaze into the distance as he mused. A wise man once said that the lifeblood of a person lies in their essential energy, while the lifeblood of a nation lies in the hearts of the people. Truer words have hardly ever been spoken. Pei Qian turned to look at him, and she finally recalled that he had mentioned that he was once a scholar. The two of them made their way down the mountain on foot, and they arrived in a village. Beyond that were cities and towns, and the rugged mountain paths had been replaced by official roads. They encountered many people of all walks of life along the way, with most of them only fleeting encounters that didn't lead to anything. On this day, they stopped by a street-side tea shop, where Pei Qian purchased 2 large bowls of cold tea out of her own pocket. She wove herself a conical hat out of bamboo fibers, and it was a very amusing sight to see her sword and saber strapped to her waist, her bamboo bookcase on her back, the conical bamboo hat on her head, and her hiking pole leaning against the table. A group of horseback travelers dismounted outside the tea shop before making their way to the neighboring table, and their presence immediately had Pei Qian feeling a little uneasy. She was originally sitting across the table from Cui Chang, but she moved over to sit beside him for her protection. She took a quick glance at the group of travelers, then turned to Cui Chang and asked in a low voice, "Do you know what the prerequisites are for one to travel the martial world?" "Why don't you tell me?" Cui Chang prompted with a smile. "A large bag of loose gold, a tall and strong horse, a treasured blade that can slice through iron like butter, and a title that inspires awe and veneration," Pei Qian laid out. "Master told me that if you have those things, then you'll thrive in the martial world wherever you go. I don't need a tall and strong horse in the future. Master promised me that when it's time for me to go out into the world, he'll buy me a little donkey." Cui Chang nodded with a smile. The group of horseback travelers was all carrying swords and sabers, and one of them didn't immediately sit down. Instead, He pressed a hand down onto Pei Qian's conical bamboo hat as he chuckled. My goodness, I thought you were a piece of walking charcoal for a second. You take yourself for a bit of a heroine, do you? You certainly look the part with your saber and sword. Who did you learn all of that from? Cui Cheng merely continued to sip his tea. Pei Qian's complexion had turned deathly pale, and she slowly raised her head as she replied in a timid fashion, I learned that from my master. The traveler took a step back, then gave Pei Qian's bamboo bookcase a disdainful kick as he scoffed. Why are you carrying a crappy bookcase around when you're traveling the martial world? Pei Qian was just about to beg Cui Cheng for help when the latter smiled and said, Take care of it yourself. Pei Qian wiped some sweat from her forehead, while her aggressor pulled back his leg in preparation to give the bookcase on her back a second, more forceful kick. Pei Qian immediately stood up to evade his kick, and at the same time, she reflexively reached out with one hand to make a grabbing motion, drawing her hiking pole into her grasp. The traveler was not very pleased that his kick had been evaded, and he was just about to pick on Pei Qian some more when his expression abruptly stiffened at the sight of Pei Qian drawing her hiking pole into her grasp. He immediately began sweating profusely, and he hurriedly put on a fawning smile as he rubbed his hands together and mumbled something about how he was just joking around. Pei Qian briefly considered taking further action, but ultimately returned to her seat. Are you too scared to retaliate? Cui Cheng asked with a smile. Pei Qian shook her head with a glum expression as she replied, Initially, I was worried that he would break my bookcase, and when he prepared to give it a second kick, I wanted to retaliate, but I was afraid that I would inadvertently punch a hole through his chest. Why are you afraid of something like that? Cui Cheng asked. Shouldn't he be the one afraid of you? Pei Qian shook her head once again as she explained, Master once told me that the martial world isn't a place of senseless bloodshed, nor is it a place where every slight must be met with retaliation. In cases of trivial conflicts, the ability to hold one's punches is a much better reflection of how accomplished a martial artist is. Cui Cheng was very amused to hear this, but it was unclear whether he was amused by Pei Qian's boastful display or by the painfully cliched principle that she had just espoused. He finished the tea in his bowl, then said, If you only had several copper coins in total, it would pain you greatly to lose even a single one. However, once you have a mountain of immortal coins, losing a few copper coins would be. Even then, I would still look everywhere for them. Pei Qian interjected in a categorical voice. There's no way I'm just going to lose money and not try to recover it. Her master had once told her that every single lost copper coin was a poor little baby with no home to return to, so she certainly wasn't just going to abandon them. Give me another analogy, Pei Qian encouraged. I'll be sure to take it to heart. Even an old teacher eventually runs out of analogies to make and principles to espouse, Cui Cheng said with a chuckle. What if you try a little harder to think of one? Pei Qian asked, feeling a little disappointed. Cui Cheng merely shook his head and offered no response. Meanwhile, the travelers at the neighboring table had already departed on horseback without even touching their bowls of tea. It seemed like they had some urgent business to attend to. Cui Cheng and Pei Qian also departed from the tea shop, and the former cast his gaze into the distance with a smile as he instructed, Go and catch up to them, then tell them something straight from your heart. It can be anything. Pei Qian was a little hesitant, so Cui Cheng gave her a slight nudge. Pei Qian took a deep breath, then adjusted her conical bamboo hat before sprinting forward, while carefully considering what she was going to say. It had to be something that painted her in a reasonable and positive light. She was far faster than the horses galloping up ahead, and it didn't take long at all for her to catch up to the group of fleeing travelers. The traveler who had picked on her earlier had turned to her with a look of despair on his face, and she raised her head to look back at him as she declared, Integrity is the most important quality when traveling the martial world. The traveler was dumbstruck. Do you hear me? Pei Qian asked in a forceful voice. Why? Yes. Yes. The man hurriedly replied in a trembling voice, as did the other travelers in the group. Satisfied with her work, Pei Qian drew to an abrupt halt, waiting for Cui Cheng to catch up to her. From there, the two of them made their way over the tall city walls of the provincial city. They offered incense at various Taoist temples and Buddhist monasteries. They purchased all manner of delectable foods from various markets, and while passing by a bookshop, Pei Qian purchased some books for Li Baoping and Li Huai. Of course, she had also prepared gifts out of her own pocket for all of her friends on Downtrodden Mountain. Unfortunately, immortal coins weren't a viable form of currency in the Southern Garden Nation, so she was forced to spend copper coins and scraps of silver instead, and it pained her to have to part with her babies like this, but at the very least, she could take solace in the knowledge that they were simply going to new homes instead of being lost. As Cui Cheng emerged from the bookshop with Pei Qian, he asked, "Do you ever feel like it's really tiresome having to learn your master's way of life all the time?" Pei Qian swaggered her way down the bustling streets as she replied, "Of course not. Nothing feels tiresome as long as I'm still alive. I get to fill my belly every day. What else could I ask for? Back when I was a beggar in the capital of the Southern Garden Nation, I had to wear tattered rags every day, and I didn't even have a roof over my head. It was really sad. All I could do was try to press myself as close to the walls as possible so I could get closer to the gods and the bodhisattvas and pray to them. Even so, they still didn't hear my prayers, and I was still left to starve. Not only that, but I would even be beaten if I wasn't careful." "You can't think of it that way," Cui Cheng countered with a smile. "The bodhisattvas did hear your prayers after all, didn't they? That's why they sent Chen Pingan to become your master." Pei Qian immediately stopped in her tracks upon hearing this, and a film of tears surfaced in her eyes. She told Cui Cheng to wait for her for a moment, and she rushed alone into a nearby monastery to offer up some incense. Not only that, but she even set down her bamboo bookcase before kneeling onto a cushion at the foot of the bodhisattva statue, then kowtowed many times in gratitude and reverence. After the two of them left the city, Cui Cheng declared that they would be traveling to the capital of the Southern Garden Nation. Pei Qian nodded and didn't say anything. On the bank of a river not far away from the capital, Cui Cheng had taken a seat, while Pei Qian was scooping up some water out of the river to wash her face. "Are you still afraid of that Chao Qinglang?" Cui Cheng asked. "If so, we can enter the city a little later." Pei Qian remained silent as she stared blankly at the opposite riverbank. Cui Cheng picked up a stone before gently tossing it into the water, then smiled as he said, "It's not a big deal if you fear someone or something, but it's a problem if you fear them so much that you don't even dare to face them. There are many brilliant scholars who have achieved more in the literati world than those who came after them could ever hope to match. But does that mean everyone should just give up on their studies? Some people have written brilliant pieces that put others to shame, but does that mean everyone who comes after them should abandon writing altogether? If you decide to walk down a path in life, there will inevitably come a point when you come across someone who makes you feel awestruck and inferior. In that situation, the worst thing you could do is go into a shell and remain in your comfort zone for the rest of your life. At the very least, you have to know what the scenery looks like up there. You have to open your eyes wide and take a good look. You can't be afraid or hide. Otherwise, you'll be doomed to spend the rest of your life in hiding. I'm saying all of this to you out of personal experience. Back when I was a scholar, I was extremely proud, and I never lost a debate to anyone. After that, I began pursuing martial arts, and I remained proud and resilient, embarking on long journeys with nothing more than my fists to protect myself. My goal in both disciplines was to be above everyone else. In times when there are no heroes, mediocre laymen rise to the fore. What's most depressing about that is not the mediocre layman rising to the fore. Instead, it's the lack of heroes in that era. Hence, we shouldn't be afraid of the competence and brilliance of others. Accepting the brilliance of others while trying to outdo them is the true essence of growing up. There will come a day when you will no longer be Chen Pingan's first ever disciple. Instead, you will just be Pei Qian and nothing else. Of course, Chen Pingan would be willing to always look after you. That's the type of person he is, and one's nature is not easily changed. Perhaps he'll stop influencing every single aspect of your life, but those close to him are burdens that he's willing to carry for his entire life. He doesn't fear hardship. On the contrary, he welcomes and embraces it. If you try to encourage people like them to think more for themselves, then you may as well be trying to teach a monkey to read. He'll definitely take your advice on board, but it'll be very difficult for him to change his ways. Cui Cheng's voice trailed off there. After a brief silence, Pei Qian raised her head and declared, "Let's go to the capital. I'll lead the way." Thus, the two of them made their way to the capital of the Southern Garden Nation. As usual, they vaulted over the city walls in secret, as they didn't have passports. In any case, she was doing this under the supervision of Cui Cheng, so even if her master were to find out, surely he wouldn't be too angry with her. After setting foot in this all-too-familiar city, Pei Qian began to slow down in her tracks. Cui Cheng didn't try to rush her. They passed through Champion Scholar Alley, passed by the martial arts school that was still in operation, then made their way to the Heart Manifestation Temple, and by then Pei Qian had already picked up the pace a little. However, upon arriving at the entrance of the monastery, Cui Cheng suddenly stopped in his tracks, even though there was no one else in his path. Pei Qian was just about to follow him inside when he shook his head as he said, "You must walk this final part of the journey alone." Pei Qian gave him a firm nod, then turned and departed, making her way down a wide street en route to that small alley. Cui Cheng looked on with a smile at her departing figure for a moment, then entered the monastery. However, he didn't offer up any incense. Instead, he simply found a peaceful spot on the walkway and sat down. Over at the small alley, Pei Qian discovered that the yard gates were locked, so she sat down on the steps outside. And only at around dusk did a young boy in a Confucian robe finally enter the alley. Pei Qian stood up to face him, and Chao Qinglang hurriedly joined her with a smile on his face. Pei Qian greeted him. "Long time no see, Chao Qinglang." Chao Qinglang smiled. "Hello, Pei Qian." He then unlocked the gates as he said, "You left in a real hurry last time, so I didn't get a chance to ask you how Mr. Chen was doing. Why are you always asking for a beating?" Pei Qian blurted out in an annoyed fashion. Chao Qinglang could only shake his head with an amused smile. He was genuinely a little afraid of her. Pei Qian stared at Chao Qinglang in silence, prompting the latter to ask in a puzzled manner, "What's wrong?" Pei Qian swaggered her way into the courtyard, then picked out that familiar little stool for herself before declaring, "Chao Qinglang, I have something to discuss with you." Chao Qinglang sat down with a smile. Two little stools, two young acquaintances. In the walkway of the Heart Manifestation Temple, Cui Cheng closed his eyes and was silent for a long while, seemingly waiting for that reunion in the small alley. It seemed that he would only be content once he found out the answer. However, he was becoming wearier by the second, and he was no longer able to disguise his frail condition after Pei Qian departed. At some point, he was approached by a monk, but he merely shook his head with a smile, and the monk joined his palms and lowered his head before departing. Cui Cheng remained seated with his legs crossed, and it seemed like he had finally let go of something. His hands were gently folded over his lap, and after a long silence, he closed his eyes once again as he murmured to himself, "I see the true meaning of life, but I am unable to express it." On Downtrodden Mountain, Chen Pingan was still out on his long journey, while Cui Cheng had also left on a journey of his own, leaving the bamboo building vacant. Recently, Chen Lingjun was no longer going out to wander aimlessly, and he would occasionally come to sit at the stone table on the cliff. He knew that he was the most disliked person in Downtrodden Mountain. He wasn't as clever and hardworking as Chen Rushu, nor was he as naively adorable as Zhou Mili. As for Tsin Yuanji, she had been brought onto the mountain by Zhu Lian, and she possessed decent aptitude. She was also able to endure the hardships of her training, and she led a busy and meaningful life. Shi Ro was in the small town looking after the shop. The shop didn't earn much money, but ultimately, she was earning money for Downtrodden Mountain, and she was also very close with Pei Qian. Whenever Pei Qian had some spare time, she would be sure to go and visit Shi Ro in the shop. She told everyone that she did this because she was worried that Shi Ro would embezzle the shop's earnings. But in reality, she was just worried that Shi Ro would feel shunned and left out. In contrast, Chen Lingjun was too intent on keeping up appearances to be true to himself, and he was disliked no matter what he did or said. After 3 deity night travel banquets, the imperial river god had become more and more courteous to him, and that left him feeling very dejected. The imperial river god had begun sucking up to him, and it made him miss the days of old, back when they ate and drank together in the water palace, exchanging vulgar insults about each other's mothers. However, Chen Lingjun was no fool, and there were many things that hadn't escaped his notice. For example, he knew that Cui Cheng definitely wouldn't be returning from this trip to the Lotus Root blessed land. However, he couldn't even bring himself to bid the old man farewell. Even as Cui Cheng departed with Pei Qian, all he could do was sit by the cliff and stare blankly into space, pretending to be oblivious to it all. At this hour, Pei Qian should have been on the second floor, taking a beating from Cui Chang. But on this day, the bamboo building was silent. Chen Lingjun laid his chin down on the table to rest, and before him was a pile of sunflower seeds that he had taken from Chan Rushu. The sun this morning felt particularly warm, and it sapped him of all strength, leaving him too feeble to even eat sunflower seeds. He was considering making his way to the entrance of the mountain to chat with Zheng Dafeng. The two of them got along quite well, but the only problem was that some of the things that Zheng Dafeng said were too profound, and only after extensive contemplation after the event would he actually be able to figure out the meaning behind his words. Chen Lingjun turned his gaze to the residential area on the mountain. The old cook was absent, as was Pei Qian, and Sun Yuanji didn't know how to cook. She was also eager to avoid the hassle, so she asked Chen Rushu to prepare her a bunch of pastries and snacks. As for Zhou Mili, she was a water demon who didn't actually need to eat, so all of a sudden, there was a complete absence of cooking fires on the mountain. Chen Lingjun felt like there were far fewer people on Downtrodden Mountain than usual, and the few that were here were all busy with their own things, so it felt much less homely and welcoming. Chen Lingjun then turned his gaze to the second floor of the bamboo building, feeling a little forlorn. Back when Cui Chang was around, Chen Lingjun constantly felt uncomfortable. He felt like he was always 2 punches away from the afterlife. However, now that Cui Chang was gone, he couldn't help but feel a little depressed and empty inside. Chen Lingjun heaved a long sigh, then picked up a sunflower seed, planning to chew on it without shelling it first, just for something to do to assuage his boredom. All of a sudden, his entire body stiffened, and he gently set down the sunflower seed again, following which he began to slowly turn away, pretending as if he hadn't noticed the figure that had just arrived. However, the old man who had just appeared out of thin air smiled at him, and he had no choice but to acknowledge their presence, gulping nervously before rising to his feet as he extended a respectful bow. Chen Lingjun pays his respects to the Imperial Preceptor. It was Imperial Preceptor Cui Chan, someone who could crush him with a single finger. Chen Pingan wasn't on Downtrodden Mountain, Cui Chang wasn't in the bamboo building, and Zhu Lian and Wei Bo had gone to the central mountain, so Chen Lingjun had no backer at the moment. "Get out of here," Cui Chan said with a smile. Chen Lingjun took a glance at the bluestone path leading from the bamboo building to the residential area, but that didn't seem like a safe route to take. Thus, he took his leave and began climbing his way down the cliff. This path took him a little further away from Cui Chan and was thus a little safer. Cui Chan smiled as he recalled the forlorn look on Chen Lingjun's face as he gazed upon the bamboo building. He made a decision there and then, but he wasn't going to make a big fuss out of it. There was a large mountain to the west of the Dragon Spring Prefecture that was currently temporarily occupied, and it seemed to be quite suited to habitation for a flood dragon. Cui Chan stood in the walkway of the second floor, quietly waiting for someone to arrive. A streak of white light came racing in from the horizon like a bolt of lightning, completely disregarding the rules that Ruan Qiong had put into place. Cui Chan shook his head as he heaved an internal sigh. Thankfully, he had the foresight to notify Ruan Qiong in advance. In the blink of an eye, the streak of white light descended to reveal Cui Dongshan. He was holding an ordinary green bamboo cane, and there was an exhausted look on his face. He landed near the bamboo building, his eyes severely bloodshot as he yelled in a furious voice, "Do you do nothing all day but eat shit, you old bastard? Could you not have stopped Grandpa from going to the blessed land? What would that have accomplished?" Cui Chan asked. Cui Dongshan's face was purple with rage. "The longer you can keep him here, the longer he'll be able to live. Could you not have waited until I got here?" Cui Chan remained silent with a cold expression. All of a sudden, Cui Dongshan calmed down as he took a deep breath, then continued, "Whether it be in his studies or his pursuit of martial arts, Grandpa has always been constantly advancing and moving forward. The only time he backed down was for the sake of his 2 good-for-nothing grandsons, and that spelled the beginning of the end for him. He lost his chance at reaching the 11th tier, and with it he was doomed to lose his life. He also did it for the sake of your teacher and this downtrodden mountain," Cui Chan added. Cui Dongshan stumbled back a few steps, then sat down beside the stone table with both hands gripping his bamboo cane for support as he lowered his head with tightly gritted teeth. However, he was only able to sit for a moment before he rose to his feet again, then began pacing in a rapid, agitated circle. Cui Chan watched as Cui Dongshan paced back and forth like a cat on a hot tin roof, and he said, "You can't even compare with me. You don't even know what our grandfather truly cared about, and you don't understand why he made the decisions that he did, so what was the point in coming here for you? What would have been the point had you gone to the lotus root blessed land to find our grandfather? The only thing you would have done is ensure that our grandfather couldn't pass away in peace. You better watch your mouth, Cui Chan." Cui Dongshan snapped with a fierce expression as he abruptly stopped in his tracks. "It's about time that you grew up and faced reality, Cui Dongshan," Cui Chan scoffed. "Just because you've returned to the upper 5 tiers doesn't mean that you have the right to do as you please in my presence." Cui Dongshan once again sat down with his bamboo cane in his arms, no longer looking up at the second floor as he murmured to himself, "Why did Grandpa insist on getting involved in the battle between 3rd and 4th? Why did he go insane? It was all our fault. Grandpa was a scholar, and he always hoped for us to become true scholars as well. Grandpa dedicated his entire life to the teachings of the second sage, so why did he go out of his way to support the teachings of the scholarly sage on the Middle-earth divine continent? And what did we do in return? We betrayed our master and left our grandfather even more disappointed." Cui Chan was finally infuriated, and he slammed a hand down onto the railing as he yelled, "You're asking me? How about you ask the world in your own conscience?" Cui Dongshan gripped tightly onto his hiking pole with a dazed expression as he murmured, "I'm too tired to ask." He recalled that back in his youth, he was made to scale a mountain by his strict grandfather. It was a long and rigorous journey, particularly so for a small child. On one occasion, Cui Chang made his way up the mountain on his own, paying no heed to his struggling grandson behind him. Cui Chang seemed to have been intentionally trying to provoke his grandson. Not only did he leave the boy far behind, but he also began reciting a piece of poetry written by a renowned scholar of the Middle-earth divine continent. "A hero like you is rarely seen. I wish to praise you, but I would struggle to list all your fine qualities without a brush as thick and long as a bamboo pole." Cui Dongshan committed that piece of poetry firmly to memory. After he grew up and left home in a fit of rage, he became the disciple of the old scholar. From there, the old scholar somehow became the scholarly sage, and as a result, he had inexplicably become the scholarly sage's first ever disciple. He had finally gotten the opportunity to meet that revered Confucian scholar of the Middle-earth divine continent, but as opposed to regarding that as an honor, the proud and haughty Cui Dongshan only had one thought in his mind at the time, which was that he had to tell his grandfather about this encounter once he returned home. He would tell his grandfather that the person he revered so much had been bested by his grandson in terms of writing, and when it came to go, he was even more inept, losing so badly that he was on the verge of plucking the hairs of his beard straight off his chin. There were many things that he had to say to his grandfather, but he didn't say them when he could, and he couldn't now that he wanted to. In the distance, the toll of the morning bell rang out from the Dragon Spring prefectural city. The toll of the bell heralded the opening of the city gates. Countless residents of the city would go out to work for the day, only reuniting with their families once the dusk drums had been struck. The Late Spring Prefecture near the foot of the Great Li Empire's central mountain was a moderate-sized prefecture that couldn't be considered large or small. It wasn't a particularly wealthy place in the luminous Vermilion Empire of old, not particularly exceptional in either scholarly or martial fortune, and it wasn't even able to benefit from its close proximity to the mighty Purple Draw Mountain. The newly appointed prefectural overseer, Wu Yuan, was an outsider and apparently, he had also been serving as a prefectural overseer back in the Great Li Empire. Officially, this was a neutral transfer, but all those who were in the know were aware that he had been demoted. Once an official was cast far out of the line of sight of the imperial court, their chances of quickly making their way up the ranks in the officialdom were going to be next to zero. Wu Yuan had been sent to a subsidiary nation, yet hadn't received a promotion to compensate for the move, so it was clear that he had fallen out of favor, presumably because he had somehow ended up on the bad side of some high-ranking figure. However, regardless of how his political career panned out, the fact of the matter was that he was a native official from the Great Li Empire, and he was also quite young, so there was still hope for him. Hence, the governor of the Late Spring Prefecture had still instructed all of his subordinates to treat Wu Yuan with respect and patience, and to be tolerant of him even if he were to make some unorthodox moves that went against how things were normally done in the area. Thankfully, following his arrival in the late spring prefecture, Wu Yuan had hardly done anything at all. He did the bare minimum, showing up for work on time every day, but all of the various administrative duties were left to the prefecture's incumbent officials, and there were many opportunities where he could have made public appearances, but chose to give them to a few of his veteran subordinates. As a result of his hands-off approach, he was able to integrate himself into his new workplace very seamlessly and harmoniously, but over time, his subordinates had also become a little disdainful of him for his soft and mellow nature. On this day, Wu Yuan was sitting in his office as usual, his desk laden with county chronicles and maps from various places. Occasionally, he would raise his brush to write something. All of a sudden, he seemed to have sensed a presence, and he looked up to discover a familiar figure leaning against the entrance to his office. A bright smile immediately appeared on his face as he rose to his feet and extended a respectful bow. "Welcome, Mountain God Wei." It was none other than Wei Bo, and he strode over the doorstep with a smile as he jibed. "What a cold and callous man you are, Master Wu. You only sent a greeting card for the last night travel banquet. I'm afraid my salary is too meager for me to indulge in luxuries," Wu Yuan replied with a smile. "I spend about 10% to 20% of it just to feed myself, then 50% to 60% on books. I'm saving up the rest in order to purchase an antique inkstone that caught my eye in the neighboring auspicious Cloud Prefecture, so I'm really in no position to be attending night travel banquets. I thought I was too far away for you to come and confront me in person, but you've completely subverted my expectations, Mountain God Wei." Wei Bo flipped a hand over to produce an antiquated inkstone that was once a renowned treasure in the former luminous Vermilion Empire, then gently set it down onto the desk. "You may be cold and heartless, but I'm not the same. Not only did I come all this way to visit you, I even went out of my way to purchase this gift." Wu Yuan bent down to closely scrutinize his beloved antique inkstone, carefully stroking it with his fingers as he exclaimed in elation. "This is a premium inkstone that came straight from the bottom of the Green Flood Dragon Pit. What's remarkable about it is that the hole has already been sealed off by the general stationed there by our Great Li Empire, and martial artists have been sent there specifically to guard the hole. Clearly, it's about to become His Majesty's private property, and that's why the few remaining antique inkstones from that hole have become so expensive of late. With my current salary as prefectural overseer, I may not be able to afford one even after 100 years." Wu Yuan reluctantly averted his gaze from the inkstone, then turned to Wei Bo with a smile as he asked, "How can I help you today, Mountain God Wei? For this precious gift, I assure you that I'll answer any question of yours to the best of my abilities." "What do you think of Central Mountain God Jin Qing?" Wei Bo asked. The god of the Great Li Empire's new Central Mountain, Jin Qing, had once been the most revered mountain god of the luminous Vermilion Empire. Halfway up the mountain was a natural sword-washing pond that was nothing short of a blessing from the heavens. Many swordsmen flocked to the mountain from far and wide to wash their swords, and Wei Qing often served as their Dao guardian in secret. Hence, not only was he on very good terms with the swordsmen of the luminous Vermilion Empire, but he was also close with many of the continent's Golden Courtier swordsmen as well. Among them, he was closest with Li Tuanjing of the Wind Lightning Field. In the past, Li Tuanjing had visited the luminous Vermilion Empire and gotten into many conflicts, even irking the northern mountain god at the time, placing him in grave peril. However, he was saved by Jin Qing, who insisted on escorting Li Tuanjing safely out of the empire. At the time, Li Tuanjing had only been at the Dragon Gate tier, yet Jin Qing had been willing to oppose both the northern and southern mountain gods of the luminous Vermilion Empire to ensure his safety. Wu Yuan burst into laughter, then turned around and pulled out a stack of papers from the desk behind him. The papers were laden with small and neat text, and he handed them to Wei Bo as he declared, "It's all here." Wei Bo read through the contents of the papers as he mused. "On the way here, I overheard many of the local residents talking about how their prefecture has been assigned an overseer who never seems to be around, but it seems like you've been much busier than people have been led to believe. There was not much point in listening to errant rumors, and they could easily lead one astray. However, all of the records kept by Wu Yuan presented reliable accounts of the concrete feats of mountain god Jin Qing throughout history. The records denoted specific feats of Jian Qing with their corresponding years, and on top of that, there were also annotations made in red. It was as if Wu Yuan were posing as a passive observer, writing down his own observations and insights while reading through some historical records. He included rumors and stories about Jian Qing in his records as well, but in those instances, he made sure to specify the unsubstantiated nature of those accounts so that they weren't confused with the more concrete and substantial stories. Weibo read through the records very meticulously, but also very quickly, and after going through the entire stack of papers, he returned them to Wu Yuan with a smile as he remarked, "Looks like my gift did not go to waste." He then got up onto the tips of his toes and glanced at the stack of papers on the desk as he continued, "What a coincidence! It seems like you've been looking into the origins of many of the auspicious Cloud Prefecture's inkstone quarries. Are you looking to publish a book? Surely it's not a good look for the overseer of the Late Spring Prefecture to be secretly earning such quick pocket change through the specialty local product of the auspicious Cloud Prefecture. I didn't really have much to do, so I wanted to use this as an incision point to look into the changes that took place in the officialdom of the luminous Vermilion Empire," Wu Yuan explained in a candid fashion. "The secret files of all fallen nations and empires are sealed away, making them inaccessible to me, so if I want to find out this information, then I have to do so in some other, more roundabout way." Weibo gave a nod of approval as he said with a sigh, "It's a real shame that you weren't assigned the new governor of our Dragon province. Everyone should be punished and rewarded accordingly for their transgressions and merits," Wu Yuan replied with a smile. "I'm already very satisfied that I was able to retain my position of prefectural overseer at all. On top of that, now that I've been sent here, I'm out of the line of sight of certain powerful figures of the imperial court, and I won't run the risk of getting into the way of some people, so I'd say this is a blessing in disguise. It's a nice and peaceful life here." Wu Yuan could tell that Weibo didn't seem to have any intentions of staying for too long, so he said, "I'm assuming you must intend to visit Suru on this trip as well, right? I suggest you pay a visit to the Central Mountain Temple first before you go visit your old friend." "That's the plan," Weibo confirmed with a nod. "Prior to this, I was in seclusion on Cloud Drape Mountain, and Mr. Su kept a lookout for me, only to depart without a word right as I was about to emerge successfully from seclusion, returning to Purple Draw Mountain. He has done me a massive kindness, and it would be far too ungrateful of me not to go and thank him in person. In that case, I bid you farewell, Mountain God Wei," Wu Yuan said with a smile. "I would like some alone time to appreciate my new inkstone." Weibo smiled and departed without another word, simply vanishing into thin air. As it turned out, right as Weibo left the ship and appeared in the auspicious Cloud Prefecture, the golden eyes of the deity in the temple on the summit of the central mountain had opened in response to his presence. However, mountain god Jian Qing ultimately chose to turn a blind eye to Weibo's visit. Only when Weibo arrived at the foot of the mountain in the Late Spring Prefecture did Jian Qing finally emerge from his deity statue, revealing himself to be a tall and imposing man wearing a purple robe and a jade belt around his waist. There were many worshippers on the mountain, but he remained invisible to them all. Jian Qing made his way directly through the crowds of worshippers, then made his way out of the temple, only taking a single step to reach the relatively more peaceful summit of Purple Draw Mountain's secondary peak. All of the 5 mountains in all nations in the world consisted of many individual mountains and peaks, often spanning enormous territories that encompassed entire mountain ranges. For example, Purple Draw Mountain consisted of 8 peaks, and its main peak was once revered as the master of all mountains in the central region of the luminous Vermilion Empire. The Central Mountain Temple had been constructed on the main peak's summit, and it was where generations upon generations of emperors, officials, and normal citizens had come to pray. The secondary peak's name was the Folded Cliff Peak. There was no temple on its summit. Instead, there stood a mountain god residential palace that Jian Qing had constructed a very long time ago. At the moment, there were only several of his female envoys staying there to look after the place, while Jian Qing himself rarely visited. Back when the palace first came into existence, Jian Qing hadn't been the central mountain god yet, but Purple Draw Mountain was already the central mountain of the luminous Vermilion Empire even back then. After the former mountain god's godly body was destroyed, the role of central mountain god fell upon Jian Qing. At the time, the prime minister of the luminous Vermilion Empire had erected a thatched cottage on the Folded Cliff Peak, where he stayed for many years to study and practice martial arts. Jian Qing wore an indifferent expression as he looked down upon the landscape, viewing the world before him with a sense of cold detachment. He then turned his gaze slightly to the Old Lord Cave on the Sealed Dragon Peak. That was where Su Ruo was staying on his own. He proclaimed that he was staying there for a peaceful place to cultivate, but in reality, all of the mountain and river deities in the territory of Purple Draw Mountain knew that he was there to supervise the Central Mountain. Compared with the new Eastern Mountain, Moraine Mountain, where countless cultivators from both sides had perished in a brutal conflict, Purple Draw Mountain had gotten through relatively unscathed. All Jian Qing knew was that Su Ruo had left the territory of the Central Mountain on 2 occasions, the most recent of which was to visit Cloud Drape Mountain to ensure Weibo's safety during the latter's seclusion. However, the purpose of his first departure from Purple Draw Mountain remained a mystery. Jian Qing assumed that he had gone to seek out the Old Sword Immortal, who served as the backbone of the luminous Vermilion Empire. The fact that the Old Sword Immortal hadn't made an appearance this entire time perhaps had something to do with Su Ruo, or at least that was what Jian Qing presumed. If Su Ruo really had intercepted the Old Sword Immortal, then Jian Qing would feel a little better. Su Ruo's cultivation base was a mystery to everyone. If Ruan Qiong of the Dragon Spring Sword Sect were currently the most renowned upper 5 tiers cultivator of the Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, then Su Ruo would be his most mysterious and enigmatic counterpart. The only clue that provided any indication of Su Ruo's true power came from when Wei Jin of the Wind Snow Temple challenged Heavenly Lord Xie Shi. Some rumors came out after the event, claiming that had Su Ruo intervened, Wei Jin may not have been a match for him. Hence, even though Su Ruo was cultivating right under Jian Qing's nose, the latter had no choice but to turn a blind eye. Jian Qing took a glance at the new late spring prefectural overseer, and a cold sneer appeared on his face. Now that the Northern Mountain God had visited Wu Yuan, it stood to reason that he was going to visit Su Ruo on the Sealed Dragon Peak to express his gratitude next. After that, he would have much more confidence when he came to see Jian Qing. However, to Jian Qing's surprise, Weibo appeared directly on the folded cliff peak, slowly approaching him with a smile as he said in greeting, Weibo pays his respects to Mountain God Jian. Please pardon my intrusion. There's no need to be so formal and polite, Jian Qing said. We are both equal in position, so neither of us is below the other. If you have something to say, then make it quick. If not, then I must take my leave. Weibo nodded as he declared, I came here on this occasion to deliver you a warning. I am not very pleased with how you have been conducting yourself as the Central Mountain God, and I urge you to change your ways. Jian Qing turned his gaze away from Weibo and cast his gaze into the distance as he asked, What are you going to do about it? If you refuse to comply, then the Central Mountain is going to be sealed away, Weibo replied with a smile. Jian Qing turned his gaze back to Weibo as he raised an eyebrow. Do you have a secret edict from the Emperor of the Great Li Empire? Or are you carrying an official order from the Ministry of Rights? Of course. Weibo began with a nod then concluded, I don't. Jian Qing sneered. So you just came here on a whim to order me around? That was indeed what Weibo had done. Weibo extended a hand toward him, and the fortune of the Northern Mountain instantly began to converge toward the central region in a frenzy like an unstoppable force of nature, much like the mighty troops of the Great Li Empire. It seemed like this was not just an empty threat. Jian Qing knew that a clash of fortune between 2 of the 5 mountains would result in catastrophic consequences, and he yelled in an enraged voice, Weibo, consider the consequences of your actions. That's Mountain God Wei to you, Weibo said with a smile as he clasped his hands behind his back. Jian Qing didn't waste any more time with words. An enormous deity Dao manifestation emerged from the central mountain temple on the main peak of Purple Draw Mountain, then raised its hand up high, preparing to strike down upon the folded cliff peak. An almighty Dao manifestation appeared behind Weibo on the summit of the folded cliff peak as well. Even though Weibo was at a natural disadvantage, seeing as he was on Jian Qing's territory, his Dao manifestation was still over 500 feet taller than the central mountain gods. The Northern Mountain Dao manifestation grabbed onto the Central Mountain Dao manifestation's raised arm before pressing its other hand down onto the latter's head. After that, it took a powerful step forward, and Jian Qing's Dao manifestation was forced to stumble back in retreat, falling back toward the Sealed Dragon Peak. Even after gaining the advantage, Weibo refused to relent. A golden halo appeared behind his enormous Tao manifestation, and it grabbed onto the halo before preparing to swing it down upon the central mountain Tao manifestation's head. Fortunately, both of them were holding back, and their Tao manifestations were insubstantial in form. Otherwise, countless buildings on the 3 peaks of Purple Draw Mountain would have already been destroyed. Right at this moment, Su Rua made his way out of a thatched cottage in the Old Lord Cave on Sealed Dragon Peak, holding his sword horizontally behind him in a rather strange position. He shook his head with an exasperated expression, and he grabbed onto the hilt of the sword behind him before gently drawing his sword several inches out of its scabbard. A mountain range instantly appeared between the pair of clashing Tao manifestations. If the two of you really must settle your differences, then I urge you to find a more diplomatic way to do so, he advised. It's completely unbecoming of a pair of mountain gods of your lofty status to be throwing hands like a pair of brutes. You'll be reduced to laughingstocks in the eyes of the gods of Moraine Mountain and Ganzhou Mountain, and I'll also be implicated for my failure to keep things civilized. Jin Qing dispelled his Tao manifestation with a dark expression, and Weibo did the same. However, the fortune of the Northern Mountain was still crashing ahead with full force. I advise you not to take things too far, Weibo. Jin Qing snapped in a cold voice. Weibo refused to relent. Jin Qing, if you continue to do things as you please without any regard for long-term consequences, then you won't be able to ensure the peace and prosperity of the Central Mountain. The people of the Great Li Empire's imperial court aren't idiots, and they know full well that you've never truly pledged your loyalty to the Great Li Empire. If you're too foolish to even realize something so simple, then I may as well do the Great Li Empire a favor and get rid of you so someone else can take your place. In any case, I really don't like the look of you, so that would be a task I would take to with relish. Su Rua has already done you a huge favor by stepping in here. Jin Qing cast his gaze toward the north, where some unnatural phenomena had already begun to appear on the border between the territories of the two mountains. Fine, he conceded in a defeated manner. What do I have to do for you to back down? How can you convince anyone that you have even an ounce of loyalty for the Great Li Empire, when you don't even respect the Northern Mountain? Weibo said with a sneer. Do you think the officials of the Great Li Empire are all naive children? Do I really need to tell you what to do? Go to Cloud Drape Mountain and apologize. Make sure to come with some hefty gifts. Su Rua clasped a hand to his forehead as he returned to his thatched cottage, wondering to himself how he had made such an uncouth friend. That's all I need to do? Jin Qing asked with a puzzled expression. What did you think? Weibo asked. If you're already going to the Northern Mountain, you may as well pay a visit to the capital of the Great Li Empire as well. As long as all remains peaceful and well in the territory of the Central Mountain, the Great Li Empire has no reason to go on a massive killing spree. They're not madmen. Ultimately, they want the same thing as us, which is to ensure the peace and prosperity of our territories. How do you not understand something so simple? By remaining so ambiguous in your allegiances, you're giving false hope to many of the former citizens of the luminous Vermilion Empire. They will look to you as a leader to start a rebellion and recapture the glory days of old. If that's really what you want to do, then honestly I would praise you as a hero. However, if you're not willing to do that, and you're willing to soil your own reputation in order to ensure the safety of the people, then why continue to remain so ambiguous and hesitant? You're giving false signals to both sides, and ultimately, that's only going to lead to destruction and ruin. Jin Qing fell into a despondent silence. Make sure you don't forget to bring gifts with you when you come visit me on Cloud Drape Mountain, Weibo reiterated. People always say that it's the thought that counts, but that's nonsense. The value of your gifts shows how much you care. After that, Weibo departed from the folded cliff peak and made his way to the thatched cottage outside the Old Lord Cave. Sura was standing at the door, leaning against the doorway with his arms crossed as he complained. This is how you repay me? Not only did you come here empty-handed, but you immediately started causing trouble for me. Weibo stomped a foot in frustration as he sighed. I didn't bring any gifts because you did me such a massive favor that I don't even know how to repay you. Su Rua began rubbing his own face in exasperation as he scoffed. You have to be the most unique mountain god in the history of the majestic world. I'll give you that. What can I say? Weibo sighed. I'm too impoverished to offer up anything of interest to you. Get out of my sight. Now, Su Ruo ordered with a smile. Yes, sir. Weibo replied, then instantly departed. After some thought, Su Ruo flew onto the folded cliff peak, where Jin Qing remained standing on the spot with a grim expression. Su Ruo didn't say anything. All of a sudden Jin Qing said, countless people had to brave the heat of the blistering sun and the treacherous terrains of the mountains and quarries, just to fulfill the orders of those above them. Su Ruo knew what he was referring to. Throughout the history of the luminous Vermilion Empire, countless people had been forced into extremely rigorous labor, plowing their way through mountains in search of the best inkstone materials. Back when he was alive, Jin Qing just so happened to have been one of those laborers. Some claimed that he died from an accidental drowning, while others said that he was whipped to death by supervising officials. Following his death, his resentment kept him in this world, but instead of becoming a malicious ghost, he became a heroic spirit instead, protecting the mountains and environment that he had once toiled away in. Eventually, he caught the eye of the former Purple Draw Mountain god, and was promoted up the ranks to become the mountain god of the folded cliff peak. There are no rulers under the heavens with completely clean hands, Su Ruo said. If you judge a ruler purely from a standard of morality, then that would simply be unfair. When it comes to the state of the world and the welfare of the people, all our 100 schools of thought have their own judgment criteria, and they can vary drastically. In any case, you have my respect for retaining your humanity and empathy, even as a mountain god. However, worldly affairs are complicated, and you'll almost inevitably have to go against your own wishes sometimes. I'm not going to advise you to do anything. You can go along with Weibo if you want, or you could turn him down if you please. No matter what you choose to do, you won't be putting yourself to shame as the god of Purple Draw Mountain. It's about time that I left this place. If you want, I can personally shatter your godly body before I go to spare you and Purple Draw Mountain the fate of being humiliated by someone else. Will you be able to unleash a strike of devastating power if you completely draw your sword from its scabbard? Jin Qing asked with a smile. Su Ruo nodded as he confirmed, I've been nurturing my sword for many years, and it's accumulated a great deal of power during this time. In that case, let someone else be on the receiving end of this sword strike. It'll be too much for my Purple Draw Mountain to bear, Jin Qing said with a smile. Su Ruo hesitated momentarily, then advised, there's no need to take too hefty a gift with you when you go to Cloud Drape Mountain. Jin Qing scoffed in amusement. You and he are all the same. Su Ruo cupped his fist in a salute as he smiled and said, I've long overstayed my welcome here. When you arrive at the capital, make sure to reach out. I'll treat you to some wine. Jin Qing nodded in response, then asked, Did you intentionally come to my Purple Draw Mountain in the beginning? Su Ruo stopped in his tracks as he replied in an indifferent manner, You and I are both here for the purpose of limiting casualties. You may ask, in that case, why did our school of Moism choose the Greatly Empire, thereby resulting in so many additional casualties all over the eastern treasured vile continent? That is not a question I can answer for now, but as long as you wait patiently, the answer will emerge in time. Jin Qing didn't say anything. As opposed to returning to Sealed Dragon Peak, Su Ruo departed from Purple Draw Mountain and began traveling toward the capital of the Greatly Empire. He did so by flight, but not atop his flying sword. He was not fond of using his flying sword as a flying apparatus because he had always felt like swords and swordsmen should be equals, therefore making it inappropriate for one to tread upon their sword. That unpolished jade-tier sword immortal of the luminous Vermilion Empire, who had been in seclusion for many years, had planned to kill Chao Ping, the newly appointed military governor of the Greatly Empire. However, he perished before he even had a chance to make a move. He didn't actually have to die. Su Ruo had only severely wounded him. However, the old sword immortal, who was ultimately unable to make a breakthrough even after over a century of seclusion, preferred death over imprisonment, and he certainly wasn't going to defect to the Greatly Empire. Thus, after his sword was snapped, leaving him with no chance of victory, he simply resigned himself to his fate and welcomed his death. In his final moments, he smiled graciously and declared that he knew that this plot of his would lead to his demise, and that he was honored to have Su Ruo serve as his executioner. Pei Qian was sitting on a little stool, inspecting her surroundings. The little courtyard remained the same as last time. In fact, Everything was so identical to her last visit that Pei Qian almost felt like she hadn't left at all. Instead, she had only been instructed by her master to pick up a bucket of water from the well, and she had immediately returned after that brief trip to be reunited with Chao Qinglang. Earlier, while waiting outside for Chao Qinglang, she had inspected the couplets plastered to the yard gates no fewer than 100 times. The calligraphy was great, but not so much that it made her feel inept and inferior. Chao Qinglang was looking at her, and he had many questions he wanted to ask her. For example, why had she still not grown much taller at all, even after so many years? At the moment, there had to have been a height difference of close to a foot between the two. Also, why was she suddenly carrying a bamboo bookcase, a bamboo saber, and a bamboo sword? And how was Mr. Chen doing? Pei Qian removed her bamboo bookcase from her back before setting it down behind herself, then placed her hiking pole horizontally across her lap. She cast her gaze directly ahead, away from Chao Qinglang, as she revealed in a direct and straightforward manner. You know, my master actually wanted to take you with him from the lotus flower-blessed land. He didn't want to take me at all. Chao Qinglang hesitated momentarily, then smiled as he asked, Has Mr. Chen taken you as his disciple? Pei Qian's eyes instantly began glowing as bright as celestial bodies as she nodded and confirmed, That's right. I traveled vast distances together with Master, and he didn't abandon me. Chao Qinglang's hands were curled up into loose fists, which he placed onto his knees, and a gentle smile appeared on his face as he said, Even though I'm very disappointed that Mr. Chen didn't take me with him, I think it's wonderful that you were able to go on such a long journey with him, and I envy you greatly. Pei Qian remained silent. If Mr. Chen asked you to pick up a bucket of water from the well now, would you still spill half of it before you even returned? Chao Qinglang asked. Pei Qian immediately turned to glower at him with a furious expression, only to be met with a look of amusement. She felt like she possessed immense power in her fists, but was repeatedly punching a wall of cotton, rendering all of her power useless. She crossed her arms as she harumphed coldly. You're just a fool who doesn't know anything. I'm no longer the same person I once was. I've learned so much from Master, and I never slack off. Not only do I have to make transcriptions every day, but I also have to practice martial arts, and I make sure to keep up those habits regardless of whether Master is around or not. I see. Chao Qinglang mused with a feigned look of realization. Pei Qian was feeling a little frustrated. Why was it that even after all these years, she still couldn't bring herself to be fond of Chao Qinglang at all? Compared with the quiet, sniveling coward he had once been, it seemed that he had become more courageous, and that only made him more annoying. During our last meeting, I actually wanted to kill you, Pei Qian suddenly admitted. I was worried that you would take my master away from me. You've always been in Master's thoughts. He doesn't speak about you much, only on rare occasions after he's had something to drink, but occasionally, he would stare off into the distance in a daze, and whenever that happens, I can tell from the look in his eyes that he's thinking about you. He always wanted to take you with him, and I can tell that he's very worried that you'll suffer on your own in the lotus flower-blessed land. Pei Qian held onto her hiking pole with both hands in a white-knuckled grip, and the veins on the backs of her hands were bulging as she said in a solemn manner, I'm sorry. I accept your apology because it was indeed wrong of you to have considered such a thing, Chao Qinglang said with a nod. However, I also think it's a very good thing that you were ultimately able to deny those nefarious urges. Hence, you don't have to be worried about the possibility that I could take your master away from you. Mr. Chen has taken you as his disciple, and he's not the type of person to abandon you on a whim. If there comes a day when these nefarious urges no longer even arise in your heart at all, then no one under the heavens would be able to take Mr. Chen away from you, not myself or anyone else. You make it sound like I'm just some ordinary disciple. I am Master's first ever disciple, Pei Qian declared proudly. Yes, very impressive, Chao Qinglang placated in an exasperated manner. Pei Qian took a glance at him out of the corner of her eye, then asked, Are you really not angry? Chao Qinglang cast his gaze toward Pei Qian and put on a furious expression, as if he were one of the enraged and authoritative door gods plastered to the gates outside, and he declared, I'm furious. Pei Qian scoffed. How immature can you be? Did you come to the Southern Garden Nation on your own this time? Chao Qinglang asked. Mr. Chen didn't come with you? Pei Qian shook her head as she replied. An old man who teaches me fist techniques came to the southern garden nation with me. We had to travel very far to get here. Where is this old senior that you speak of? Chao Qinglang asked in a curious manner. Pei Qian turned and cast her gaze toward the direction of the Heart Manifestation Temple in a dazed silence. All of a sudden, her mouth fell open, and she made no sound, but tears and snot suddenly began flowing down her face, much to Chao Qinglang's alarm. In the next instant, she sprang to her feet so quickly that the hiking pole resting across her lap was flung far away into the air, but she didn't even spare it a glance. Immediately thereafter, a violent tremor ran through the entire courtyard as she launched herself outside. Concerned by her erratic display of emotion, Chao Qinglang also sprang up into the air like a graceful bird, darting over the rooftops as he followed her from afar. Pei Qian landed outside the walkway in the Heart Manifestation Temple, and she immediately spotted the resting Cui Cheng. "Open your eyes, old man. You're not allowed to sleep," she yelled through her tears as she adopted a powerful fist stance. "Get up, Grandpa Cui. It's time for me to train." Chao Qinglang drifted down behind Pei Qian. A middle-aged monk also arrived on the scene, and Chao Qinglang brought his palms together in apology. The monk gave a gentle nod, then also clasped his palms together and slowly departed. Pei Qian remained in her fist stance as she continued to glower intently at Cui Cheng through tear-filled eyes. Chao Qinglang strode over to her side, then gently pressed a hand down onto her fist as he said, "The old senior has already left us." However, he discovered that he was unable to force her fist down even a single inch. Pei Qian paid no heed to him as she yelled, "Wake up, Grandpa Cui. We have to go home. This isn't our home. Our home is on Downtrodden Mountain." Chao Qinglang could sense that Pei Qian was in a very abnormal and dangerous emotional state, and he pressed his hand down onto her fist with even greater force as he yelled in a stern voice, "Pei Qian, snap out of it." Pei Qian's raging fist intent scorched the palm of Chao Qinglang's hand like a flame, but his expression remained completely unchanged as he began stepping around her. He clasped his other hand behind his back in a sword seal, and he was able to force down Pei Qian's fist over by an inch as he urged, "Stop! Let the old senior go in peace. If you keep this up, he won't be able to rest even on the other side." With her torrential fist intent interrupted, Pei Qian seemed to have returned to her senses a little, and she crouched down and began bawling in anguish with her hands clawing at her own head. Her eyes locked firmly on Cui Cheng the entire time. Cui Cheng's fist intent had faded in death, but all of a sudden, it seemed to have been resurrected in response to Pei Qian's deity drumming technique fist intent. Cui Cheng's hands were gently folded over his lap in a resting position, but they suddenly began to glow brightly, and two orbs of dazzling radiance that rivaled the luster of the sun and the moon emerged from within them. All of his fist intent surged out of his withered body before rapidly injecting itself into the two orbs of light, which were so incredibly bright that Chao Qinglang was forced to close his eyes and shield his face with his sleeve. Not only that, but the mountainous fist intent emanating from the orbs of light forced him into an involuntary retreat, all the way back until his back was pressed tightly against the wall behind him. There, he stood completely immobilized, unable to draw upon any of his spiritual energy. Even heaven and earth didn't seem to dare to restrict this mighty fist intent, but it didn't appear to have any effect on Pei Qian at all. She clenched her hands into fists as she rose to her feet, and one of the orbs remained hovering before her, then began slowly revolving around her. As for the other orb, it flew up into the sky, where it crashed into the heavens before imploding violently, sending a shower of martial fortune cascading down upon the lotus root-blessed land. This half of Cui Cheng's martial fortune should have been received by Zhu Lian, who had the choice to enter the lotus root-blessed land with Cui Cheng and Pei Qian. In the wake of Cui Cheng's demise, Zhu Lian would have been the foremost martial artist of this blessed land, given his far-roaming tier cultivation base, and he would have been able to benefit immensely from the martial fortune, but he chose to pass up this opportunity. Pei Qian didn't dare to accept the orb of martial fortune left behind for her by Cui Cheng. What if Grandpa Cui isn't dead? What if he'll only truly die after I accept this? I thought I wouldn't have to deal with separations like this now that I'm all grown up, but why is it still happening? Don't ever lie to yourself, even when you're desperate for a different reality, Chao Qinglang urged in a gentle voice. The old senior has departed. All we can do now is ensure that we live the best lives possible, so he can rest easy on the other side. With her back to Chao Qinglang, Pei Qian gave a gentle nod, then reached out with a trembling hand to catch the orb of martial fortune. There were many things that Grandpa Cui didn't get to tell Master, Pei Qian said as she turned to face Chao Qinglang. The sound of the dusk drum rang out within the monastery. The final sparring session between Li Er and Chen Pingan was very different from their usual sessions. Li Er told Chen Pingan to go all out and resort to any means necessary to stay in the fight for as long as possible. Chen Pingan was rather confused. He was but a mere 6th-tier martial artist, while Li Er was a 10th-tier martial artist. Even if he were to go all out, what difference would it make? Li Er smiled as he explained. For this sparring session, I'll make it so that my attacks serve only the purpose of foiling your attacks. Just treat this like you're in a battle of life and death. You are facing an opponent of a far superior cultivation base to yourself. And as a result of this cultivation-based disparity, your opponent is fighting you with disdain and merely toying with you. Furthermore, he's unaware of the true nature of your powers, and he's under the false impression that you're only a pure martial artist with a decent foundation. His plan is to completely exhaust your true qi, then take his time torturing you to death. This only made Chen Pingan even more confused. Essentially, what Li Er was implying was that he didn't have to restrict himself to his fist techniques in this sparring match. Instead, he could use his sword, his talismans, as well as any other shady and underhanded tricks he had up his sleeve. Li Er didn't offer any further explanation, only a warning. Don't try to half-ass this. If I feel like you're not taking this seriously, I'll make it so that my final punch leaves you bedridden and coughing up blood for half a year on Lion Peak. With that, Li Er turned and set off for the dock, leaving Chen Pingan at the entrance of the thatched cottage. Li Er stood on one end of the small boat, holding the bamboo pole that served as an oar, and only after waiting for several minutes did Chen Pingan also begin making his way toward the dock. Li Er took a glance at him and was unable to suppress a smile. Chen Pingan had taken off his shoes and rolled up his pant legs, but he hadn't done the same with his sleeves. He had also not forgotten to carry Sword Immortal on his back. Get on the boat, Li Er instructed. All of a sudden, Li Er's bamboo pole came swinging down upon Chen Pingan's head. However, he was already prepared, having clasped an inch movement talisman between his fingers up his sleeve, and in the blink of an eye, he vanished from the spot. He stepped on the stone cave walls and sprang back and forth several times in rapid succession, opening up a large distance between himself and Li Er. From there, he landed on the surface of the water in a crouched position before sliding back, leaving a trail of ripples in his wake, only to draw to an abrupt halt as an earth-pinch talisman and a vast flowing river talisman exploded in unison, the former in the cave wall and the latter in the water. At the same time, a pair of daggers appeared in his hands, the very same pair that he had taken from that deer-cutter mountain assassin. The front tip of the bamboo pole appeared to have struck the ground, but it hadn't actually made contact. Not only had Li Er's aura not blown a trench into the earth, but it also didn't even raise the slightest puff of dust. This was a fine demonstration of the perfect control that an N-tier martial arts master had over their fist intent. In front of the small boat, the surface of the water rose up violently, while loose rocks sprayed in all directions, and Chen Pingan sprang forth at an incredible speed, making a beeline for Li Er with his daggers raised. Li Er raised his bamboo pole and turned to Chen Pingan as he smiled and remarked, "You're certainly putting on a fine little show." He casually plunged the bamboo pole toward Chen Pingan, and the boat beneath his feet slowly drifted forward. Chen Pingan turned to evade the bamboo pole, and with another inch movement talisman held in his left hand, he instantly vanished from the spot once again. Li Er loosened his grip around the bamboo pole, then tightened it again and thrust the pole behind himself without even bothering to turn around. The bamboo pole rammed straight into Chen Pingan's chest right as he appeared behind Li Er, catapulting him into the water. Thankfully, he had managed to dodge slightly to the side at the last second, so the blow to his chest was only able to tear through his robe and his flesh to reveal the bone underneath. Otherwise, the pole would have pierced straight through his chest and emerged out of his back. The small boat beneath Li Er's feet continued to drift forward on its own. As a 10th-tier pure martial artist, Li Er's aura was more than sufficient for propelling the boat. In fact, if he were to truly unleash his aura in full force, then he could easily stir up this entire water channel into a turbulent frenzy. At the bottom of the water channel, Chen Pingan had detonated dozens of water talismans at once to achieve a similar effect. Li tightened his grip slightly around the bamboo pole, and the boat continued onward in a slow and steady fashion, completely unaffected by the raging turbulence around it. Li stomped a foot down onto the boat, and a thunderous rumble rang out deep within the water channel. A hint of surprise appeared on his face, and he moved from one end of the boat to another, paying no further heed to Chen Pingan. He took a glance at a wall in the distance, and the boat beneath his feet shot forth like a speeding arrow as he swung his bamboo pole down with tremendous might. Ain soul had concealed itself within the wall long ago using a steel-carrying talisman, and many red herrings had been dangled out to distract Li from it, but he had still been able to spot it right away. The Ain soul was forced to evade the almighty blow, and as soon as it moved, it immediately revealed its true form as a white-robed young man with a folding fan hanging from his waist. Even though it was a little panicked in its escape, there was still a smile on its face, and it possessed an insubstantial and ethereal body like that of a deity. As soon as it emerged from the rock wall, Chen Pingan's Ain soul made a hand seal with one hand, and a streak of radiant white sword light shot out of its glabella. It was first the flying sword that he was yet to completely refine into a bonded item. Even so, its power had been greatly enhanced after being sharpened using the dragon-slaying platform for so long. Once again, Li's bamboo pole didn't make contact with the rock wall. With a casual swat, he sent first crashing into the rock wall like a cannonball. It was nothing more than an ordinary bamboo pole filled with Li's fist intent, yet it was able to remain completely unscathed. Again, Li chuckled, right as another flying sword shot forth toward him from behind. He wasn't concerned in the slightest. His fist intent had formed an impenetrable suit of armor around him, one that he had full confidence in. However, a surprised look suddenly appeared on his face as it occurred to him that the second flying sword was only a replica sword from Hatred Sword Mountain. He had arrived at this realization as the flying sword had been easily deflected away by his fist intent. The third flying sword was the fastest one of all, and it was hurtling directly toward the back of Li's head. At the same time, first had circled around and was approaching him once again. "Well, that's a little annoying," Li remarked with a hint of exasperation in his voice. All of a sudden, he released his bamboo pole before vanishing from the spot, only to return an instant later with 3 flying swords caught in his grasp, while flurries of bright sparks erupted out of the palm of his hand. He had returned to the boat so quickly that the bamboo pole was still suspended in midair, not even getting a chance to fall before it was caught again. In one hand, Li held the 3 flying swords, and at the same time, he pressed the palm of the other forcefully against one end of the bamboo pole, causing the small boat beneath his feet to sway slightly. The bamboo pole was sent hurtling through the air, piercing straight through Chen Pingan's abdomen to nail him to the bottom of the water channel. Li's attack was swift and vicious, and Chen Pingan's reaction was just as brutal. He thrust a palm against the bottom of the water channel, launching himself upward to forcibly remove the bamboo pole from his body, following which he vanished using an inch movement talisman. Li merely smiled and didn't press his advantage. He was supposed to be playing the role of someone who was toying with Chen Pingan, so he couldn't just swoop in and end the battle. One of the fine qualities of Chen Pingan was his ability to be unaffected by pain, ensuring that he would remain calm and steady even after sustaining severe injuries. There were some supposed martial arts prodigies whose combat prowess became more enhanced with the severity of their injuries. However, this did come at a price, and the injuries that they sustained often caught up to them, either during or after the battle. Essentially, they were sacrificing their bodies for greater combat prowess. In a battle between 2 warriors of similar cultivation base, such prodigies would be much more likely to survive to the end. Courage in the face of adversity alone wasn't enough to make one an exceptional martial artist, but if one didn't possess such a quality, then they shouldn't be pursuing martial arts in the first place. However, in a battle against someone of a slightly superior cultivation base, this quality would become a double-edged sword. The ideal outcome would be for one to successfully take down their more formidable foe at the cost of their own life. Battles between martial artists appeared quite monotonous and predictable, with everyone employing the same few tactics repeatedly to exchange blows with one another, but in reality, it was a complex game in itself, and there was certainly more to it than met the eye. In particular, once a martial artist reached the 10th tier, their eyes would be open to a whole new world. Song Changjing possessed extremely lofty ambitions, and he was so devoted to martial arts that he was willing to cast aside any claim that he may have had on the throne in exchange for purity. His devotion to the martial arts went far beyond that of the average master, and his ultimate pursuit was to have the immortals on the mountain summit come down to kneel and kowtow before him. His ambition granted him power, and Li Er was self-admittedly inferior to Song Changjing in this regard. Once a pure martial artist reached the summit, regardless of what fist techniques they had mastered or the nature of their fist intent, there were really only two paths that they could pursue. The first path was like creating a blessed land, placing strong emphasis on the width and breadth of one's fist intent, and it was more suited to those who were prideful and ambitious. The second path was more like an immortal creating a small world, and it was easier for those pursuing this path to return to simplicity. If there existed no path underfoot, then one would continue to aim to ascend higher. It wasn't that Li Er didn't want to pursue the former path. The problem was that it simply went against his personality, and his fist intent was already sufficiently pure, so as opposed to trying to artificially make himself more ambitious and prideful, it was a better option for him to go straight to the simplification tier. While chatting with Chen Pingan over some wine, Li Er had heard the former mention a man on Downtrodden Mountain by the name of Zhu Lian. His nickname was the martial arts maniac, and he was like a deranged demon in battle, but outside of that, his personality was as mild and aloof as that of an immortal. Chen Pingan was usually not one to make concrete statements, as he often considered things from many different angles, but he had mentioned with great confidence that Zhu Lian was the type of martial artist least susceptible to straying down demonic paths. Li Er felt like this Zhu Lian had to have been an exceptional prodigy, and this was a particularly glowing assessment, coming from a 10th-tier martial artist. If the opportunity arose in the future, he would like to meet Zhu Lian. Li Er casually tossed the 3 flying swords aside, then retrieved his bamboo pole and continued slowly driving his boat down the water channel. He had lashed out a little too forcefully earlier, and as a result, he was feeling a little guilty. Hence, over the course of the rest of the battle, he made sure to hold back a little, regardless of what attacks and tricks Chen Pingan threw at him. With one particular punch, he embedded Chen Pingan into the rock face, and he could have impaled the latter with his bamboo pole again, but refrained from doing so. Not only that, but he continued onward on his boat, leaving Chen Pingan behind. He knew that Chen Pingan was still definitely able to continue, and he was allowing Chen Pingan to take in a fresh breath of pure true qi. Li Er had always felt like there wasn't really anything overly complicated about martial arts. It was just a case of diligently refining one's body, and it all boiled down to how much suffering one could endure. It was a similar concept to farming, except a farmer's harvest depended on the will of the heavens, while how far one could go down the path of martial arts depended entirely on oneself. Li Er turned to check on Chen Pingan, and he was greeted by a rather bizarre sight. Chen Pingan had put on golden sweet wine, then the 100-eye Tao Dao robe over it. Even then, he still wasn't satisfied, and he also put on the snowflake Dao robe that he had obtained from Meticulous Skin City, and the colorful Dao robe from the Rainbow Sparrow residence. Thankfully, one could manipulate the sizes of Dao robes as they pleased after completing a process of basic refinement. Otherwise, he would have looked extremely bloated wearing 4 Dao robes outside of his original robe. Even so, this was still a rather uncomfortable sight for Li Er, particularly seeing as the outermost Dao robe was such an effeminate piece of clothing. However, he had to admit that this was a good option. Given Chen Pingan's current cultivation base as a martial artist, putting on these Dao robes from the very beginning would have only hindered the flow of his fist intent, and that slight difference could have led to his demise. However, now that he had sustained these severe injuries, it was a different story. At the very least, these Dao robes would allow him to withstand an additional punch or two. Li Er's boat drew to a halt by the water mirror, and he stepped onto its surface with his bamboo pole in his hand. From there, he peered into the cave that served as the entrance to the water channel. There was something happening inside. In the distance, Chen Pingan was standing on the surface of the water with a sword on his back. He wasn't using any immortal water techniques, nor were his feet moving, but he was still somehow slowly moving forward. Li Er focused his gaze on what was beneath Chen Pingan's feet. In the next instant, Chen Pingan abruptly rose up into the air, and it was revealed that he was standing atop a massive green flood dragon. The creature was quite a marvel to behold. Its foundation was formed by snow soil talismans, while its skeleton consisted of over 100 vast flowing river talismans that were closely interconnected to one another, and even the 2 premium item refinement mantras that spiritual master Fire Dragon had urged Chen Pingan to study closely had been incorporated. Neither the mantra to refine the 3 mountains nor the mantra on the immortal rain praying tablet in the Great Immortal should have been regarded solely as a means for item refinement. With the incorporation of the 2 mantras, the spine of the flood dragon resembled 2 lengths of intertwining ropes, forming an incredibly tight and resilient structure, one representing the mountain refinement technique, while the other embodied the water refinement technique. The flood dragon was further brought to life by the true intent of the examining the dragon fist stance, and the combination of all of these things culminated in the visage of an extremely fearsome flood dragon. Chen Pingan had always been very thoughtful and meticulous in his consideration of things, and that had given rise to this formidable creature. Chen Pingan was habitually holding his sword in his right hand, but he was actually left-handed. The flood dragon was crashing toward Li Er, stirring up enormous waves with its powerful body. Li Er gently rested the tip of his bamboo pole against the ground as he scoffed. "All of this looks very impressive, but it's not going to help you much here." He then gently sprang up into the air and swung his bamboo pole down with tremendous might. Even though the flood dragon was still several hundred feet away from the water mirror, its body was sliced in 2, and the only thing that continued to carry it forward was its momentum. Li Er then swung his bamboo pole horizontally through the air right as Chen Pingan appeared on his left, and the latter instantly ducked down as if he intended to descend to the ground, only to abruptly swivel around in midair to evade the sweeping bamboo pole. From there, Chen Pingan swept a sleeve through the air, and 3 flying swords flew out of 3 of his acupoints. Immediately thereafter, he stomped a foot down onto the ground, plunging the dagger in his right hand directly toward Li Er's heart, while the second dagger slid discreetly out of his left sleeve. Li Er didn't even bother to look at the 3 flying swords as he kicked Chen Pingan in the chest, sending him sliding back over 100 feet. He bent his knees slightly to absorb the impact while digging his heels into the ground, and only then was he able to ensure that he maintained his grip on the daggers in his hands. After drawing to a halt, Chen Pingan was able to shake off the residual fist aura from Li Er that was lingering in his chest, thanks to the 4 Dao robes that he was wearing. "I already told you that all this fancy nonsense is only going to get you killed," Li Er said as he casually tossed his bamboo pole aside, and it pierced over a foot into the surface of the water mirror. The flood dragon had only just reformed on the surface of the mirror, only to be completely dispelled into water once again by the bamboo pole. The talismans that formed its body were already riddled with cracks, and on this occasion, they completely disintegrated. Chen Pingan began to move. Li Er immediately followed, altering his trajectory slightly to ensure that he remained directly in front of Chen Pingan. With a knee strike, he was able to send the latter flying up into the air. Meanwhile, Li Er strode forward, seemingly quite slowly, arriving beside Chen Pingan before throwing a punch. Once again, Chen Pingan was sent flying as his true qi stagnated and his Dao robe struggled audibly, and he tumbled onto the surface of the lake several hundred feet away, where he skipped over the surface of the water like a stone for several dozen more feet. Li Er set off in rapid pursuit, with every single step that he took pulverizing the spiritual energy in the air and the water around him. He was charging directly toward Chen Pingan, and he abruptly lunged forward, barreling his shoulder straight into Chen Pingan's chest right as the latter whipped out an inch movement talisman. Chen Pingan felt as if he had been struck in the chest by a hammer, and his Yin soul emerged from his body, adopting a natural yet strange fist technique that appeared slow and meticulous, but was actually a dizzying blur. The fist technique helped Chen Pingan ward off the majority of Li Er's fist aura, and once Chen Pingan steadied himself, his Yin soul returned to his body, all in a natural and free-flowing sequence. As opposed to pressing his advantage, Li Er gave a pleased nod. This was what he wanted to see. If one were to practice martial arts and pursue cultivation without ensuring a balance between the two, then their cultivation would only hinder their pursuit of martial arts. The two would constantly be in opposition against each other. ultimately resulting in detrimental outcomes. Li Er's intention with this sparring session was to help Chen Pingan find that delicate balance. While he was a martial artist, he couldn't allow himself to be carried away by his fist intent. Similarly, even though he was a chi refiner, he couldn't allow that to affect the purity of his fist intent. For a martial artist, their fists alone would suffice, but that wasn't to say that they didn't care about anything else. A true master should be able to rely on their fists while also having a vast and diverse arsenal to fall back on. Each person was the god of the small world that was their own body, and they were capable of governing everything in that small world. Seeing as Chen Pingan had already taken the first step in the right direction, Li Er was able to lash out more freely. His punches weren't all that heavy, but they came thick and fast, not giving Chen Pingan any time to think. If you want to use my fists to hone your great Tao, then you'd better pull some tricks out of your sleeve that no other martial artists under the heavens possess. If you possess such tricks, then last as long as you can. If you don't, then prepare for a lengthy period of recuperation once I'm done with you. Over at the dock, Li Lu was walking over the water channel, inspecting the trail of battle left behind as she went. As for what was happening at the water mirror, she didn't even need to look to know exactly what was unfolding. Li Lu was not unfamiliar with pure martial artists. She had once perished at the hands of a 10th-tier martial artist, but she had also previously slain 10th-tier martial artists. As a result, she had gained quite an in-depth understanding of how martial artists trained and progressed. Perhaps among all of the martial artists in the history of the majestic world, what Chen Pingan was accomplishing here wasn't all that impressive, but it was extremely rare to see a martial artist capable of weathering such a ferocious storm at just the 6th tier. Among all of the 9th and 10th tier martial artists of the world, those like Gu Yu, who took on no direct disciples, were ultimately among the minority. There were many martial arts masters who wanted to imitate Li Er in pounding their disciples with their fists like a blacksmith forging a piece of metal, but not everyone could withstand this brutal style of training like Chen Pingan. Some were physically unable to last while others crumbled mentally, and of course it was more often the case that one wasn't up to scratch in either department. Perhaps they had capable seniors and masters willing to help them, but they simply couldn't be helped in the same way as Chen Pingan. Some of them may have appeared to have made breakthroughs, but in reality, that was only because their mentors had failed to properly moderate the power and frequency of their blows. Such a breakthrough was one that was fraught with hidden flaws, ones that would all be fully revealed once the disciple reached the 8th and 9th tiers. Li Lu soon reached the entrance of the cave, but she didn't continue onward. Instead, she turned to stroll back in the same direction that she had come from. Upon returning to the dock, she stood at the edge of the mountain and water restriction of the immortal abode, where she cast her gaze toward the scenery in the distance outside of the Lion Peak. She had a vague sense that something was amiss, and she raised her head to look up at the sky. The 72 accompanying sages of the Confucian scholarly temples had always led the most pitiful and helpless existences. They were immortal, but they were bound by self-imposed rules, forced to serve as passive observers of the world without being able to intervene as they pleased. In one of her past lifetimes, Li Lu had ended up on the northwestern continent. There, she had been a sect leader at the pinnacle of the immortal tier, and high up in the heavens above the flowing dawn continent, she had chatted briefly with a Confucian sage. High up in the heavens, these sages observed the world below, but just like mortals looking out at the landscape from a mountain summit, even their vision had its limits, and things that were too far away couldn't be seen clearly. However, if they were to make use of certain ancient observation abilities, then they would be able to clearly see even the finest of details, down to the tiny inscriptions on a jade pendant carried by a certain man, or a single white hair amid a sea of exuberant black strands on a woman's head. However, one could only observe the world using such techniques for so long before they became weary of such an endeavor. Furthermore, their primary duty was not to observe the world. Instead, it was to oversee all of the Ascension tier and other upper 5 tiers cultivators under the heavens, ensuring that these almighty figures couldn't just bring harm upon the world unopposed. For the upper 5 tiers cultivators who normally resided in blessed lands and small worlds, they resembled particularly bright lanterns as soon as they left those small worlds. Thus, they immediately became the center of attention for the sages presiding above the heavens. If they were to do anything against the rules, then the sages would intervene to stop them, But if they followed the rules in everything that they did, then there would be no need for the sages to make an appearance. During their conversation, the Confucian sage had smiled and told her that the pastime that he enjoyed the most was traveling to a certain county in a certain nation once every 10 years. There, he would visit a certain plaque in a village to observe and see what minute changes had taken place on the plaque. Li Lu had no response to this at the time. No one knew the loneliness of the sages. Around an hour later, Li Lu returned to her senses from her train of thought, then turned with a smile to see a rather pitiful-looking Chen Pingan returning by boat. Li Er was also sitting on the boat, and he said, "You have to hold on to that breath of true qi and preserve the martial fortune until you get to Lion Peak. Otherwise, you won't be able to achieve what you set out to accomplish." Chen Pingan nodded in response. "Do you really not regret taking this path?" Li Er asked. "Li Lu may know some obscure technique that can help you retain the martial fortune for a bit longer." Chen Pingan shook his head as he replied, "This is the path that I must follow. The mountain-shaking fist was created by Senior Gu Yu of the Northern Complete Reed Continent, and during my travels Senior Gu taught me 3 more fist techniques. Even when he passed away, he still wanted to bestow his martial fortune upon me, so I have no regrets." Li Er didn't say anything further. As the boat reached the dock, Li Lu smiled and said, "Congratulations on making a breakthrough in both your martial arts and your cultivation, Mr. Chen." Chen Pingan flashed her a grin, but that slight movement instantly foiled the efforts that he had taken to suppress his true qi and spiritual energy up to this point, causing his condition to immediately worsen. He made his way through the mountain and water restriction at the entrance of the immortal abode, then raised his head and looked up with his hands clenched into loose fists. A golden cloud had suddenly taken shape above Lion Peak when it had been bright and clear not long ago. Shortly thereafter, a light shower began to rain down from the heavens in an extremely sparse and slow fashion. "First 15th, Chen Pingan called out. The 2 flying swords instantly appeared before him, hovering slightly above him like a pair of steps. Chen Pingan began ascending while using the pair of flying swords as footholds, as if he were scaling a staircase leading up to the heavens. All of a sudden, he drew to an abrupt halt several hundred feet away from the golden cloud of martial fortune. All of the fist intent in his body began to flow in a turbulent fashion, and he threw a punch up into the sky using the rain evaporation technique. The martial fortune cloud was instantly scattered, and the drizzling rain fell all over the Northern Complete Reed Continent. The exhausted Chen Pingan took a deep breath, then wiped the sweat from his forehead as he bent down to catch his breath. His vision was a little blurry, but he still turned his gaze to the south as he smiled and revealed, "Senior Gu, I didn't dare to tell you this last time, but someone in a bamboo building back in my hometown once said that our mountain-shaking fist is very mediocre, and that the only thing that's decent about it is the fundamental fist intent. The fist technique that I just used was taught to me by him. Rest assured, Senior Gu, I have always felt like his assessment of our mountain-shaking fist was unfair. I'll be sure to bring up this matter with him the next time I return home. Now that I'm at the Vajrabadi tier, surely I'll be able to withstand a couple more punches and get a few more words in." Mountain Master Huang Kai of Lion Peak was already standing next to Li Lu, and he remarked with an amused smile, "After that punch from Mr. Chen, our Lion Peak is definitely going to be renowned far and wide." Li Lu gave Huang Kai a rare smile as she said, "There's no need for you to refer to him as Mr. Chen if you don't want to. It sounds awkward coming out of your mouth, and I'm sure it'll feel awkward for Mr. Chen as well." Huang Kai was aware of his mistress's personality, and he nodded in response. During one of her past lifetimes, Li Lu had picked up a boy from the side of the street. She had instructed him to kowtow to her thrice, and with that rather wishy-washy rite of passage completed, he became her only direct disciple. Later on, the 2 of them established a sect on Lion Peak, and following Li Lu's passing, it fell upon Huang Kai to take up the mantle. At the time, he had only just become a golden core tier earth immortal. As a child, Huang Kai had been as thin as a stick, but his head had been disproportionately large, giving him a rather comical appearance. It was all thanks to that rather clumsy-looking child that Lion Peak had managed to stand strong all this time on the Northern Complete Reed Continent, and ultimately, he became one of the continent's most renowned nascent-tier cultivators. Out of his 4 Dao robes, the innermost one is decent, but the other 3 are not really up to scratch, and they've been damaged rather severely by my punches, Li Er suddenly said. Thankfully, Chen Pingan hadn't forgotten to take off those Dao robes before he returned to the dock by boat. It was particularly important that he had removed the outermost Rainbow Sparrow resident's Dao robe. Otherwise, if he had worn it while ascending into the heavens to dispel the golden martial fortune cloud, then it would quickly become known across the entire northern complete reed continent that there was a cross-dressing martial artist on Lion Peak. By scattering the golden cloud, Chen Pingan had left behind a bequeathment of immense martial fortune on the northern complete reed continent. As for what profound and far-reaching consequences would arise from this, Li Er had decided not to reveal certain secrets to Chen Pingan after learning of the latter's decision. There was simply no point, and revealing those secrets to him would have only had a detrimental effect, perhaps adding an element of impurity to Chen Pingan's fist intent. Only a small group of 9th and 10th tier martial artists at the pinnacle of the northern complete reed continent's martial Dao would be able to sense what Chen Pingan had just done here, and regardless of their personalities and moral compass, they would all undoubtedly feel a sense of respect for the young martial artist. Furthermore, all of the martial sage temples across the entire continent would also be grateful to Chen Pingan. Setting aside everyone else, Confucian sage Zhou would most definitely be impressed with and appreciative of Chen Pingan. Li Lu had to suppress her amusement at the recollection of Chen Pingan's effeminate attire from earlier, and she said in a gentle voice, "I'll mend Mr. Chen's Dao robes for him." Li Er was grinning from ear to ear. "What are you thinking that's gotten you in such a good mood, father?" Li Lu asked. "I'm just really happy at the thought that I'll have wine to drink once I've descended from the mountain," Li Er replied. Chen Pingan was swaying unsteadily as he descended using 1st and 15th as steps before finally landing on the ground. "Rest and recuperate on the mountain for a few days first," Li Er instructed. "Once you've consolidated your Vajrabhati tier cultivation base, I'll help you open up your joints and refine your soul. With each breakthrough, many changes, both minute and pronounced, take place in one's body, and it's better to strike while the iron is hot and do these things as soon as possible after a breakthrough." "Let's talk about this another time, Uncle Li," Chen Pingan said with a wry smile. "Right now, I can barely even remain on my feet, and just talking about more training is making me feel woozy." Li Er gave an amused smile and spoke no further on the matter. Chen Pingan turned to Huang Kai and cupped his fist in an apologetic salute as he said, "I never got the chance to thank you, Mountain Master Huang." "You're very much welcome, young Master Chen," Huang Kai said with a shake of his head. "Our Lion Peak is going to become a very notorious place thanks to you, so if anything, we are the ones indebted to you." Chen Pingan bade everyone farewell and departed with a peculiar expression, while Li Er also raced his way down the mountain. Li Lu turned to Huang Kai and asked, "Isn't the word notorious supposed to have negative connotations? Didn't I tell you to read more books? Have you been focusing solely on your cultivation all this time? I hear that you're on good terms with Mountain Master Zhou of Great Cormorant Academy. Surely you could have picked up some tidbits of wisdom from him." "I've never liked reading, even as a kid, mistress," Huang Kai sighed in a resigned manner. "Besides, Mountain Master Zhou and I never discuss any scholarly topics when we're together. And to think you had such a big head when you were small. What a waste." Li Lu scoffed with a shake of her head. Huang Kai faltered slightly upon hearing this, then patted his own head with a reminiscent look on his face. He had once been an emaciated child begging for food in the snow. While wading arduously through the snow, he encountered one of Li Lu's past incarnations. That was a scene that he would never forget for as long as he lived. Li Lu turned to the old man who had been diligently looking after Lion Peak his entire life. Lion Peak was only one of the abodes that she had left behind, and it wasn't even as important as the Dragon Palace Small World and the Southern Fragrance Water Palace. The only reason she had decided to settle here with her parents was that she liked the peaceful small town at the foot of the mountain, which was a great place for her mother to run a shop. Hence, her choice actually had nothing to do with Lion Peak and Huang Kai. However, for some reason, she was suddenly struck by a sense of sorrow at the thought that the emaciated boy with the comically large head had suddenly turned into an old man far past his prime. Huang Kai's aptitude wasn't anything exceptional. He had too stubborn a personality, and as a result, he had endured too many battles over the course of his cultivation journey. Looking after an ancestral hall on the northern complete reed continent was not an easy task. Originally, Huang Kai had chances of reaching the unpolished jade tier, but he had racked up many injuries over the years as a result of his insistence on protecting Lion Peak's ancestral hall against all manners of intruders. The lingering after-effects of those injuries meant that he would never be able to advance beyond the nascent tier in this lifetime. Li Lu hadn't actually thought much of this disciple of hers when she first returned to Lion Peak. In her eyes, the Lion Peak ancestral hall was entirely dispensable. Even if it were razed to the ground, and Huang Kai didn't bother to reconstruct it, Li Lu would have hardly been bothered at all. Perhaps she would have been inclined to reward Huang Kai had he focused on his own cultivation and reached the upper 5 tiers, as opposed to wasting all of this energy and effort in taking Lion Peak to new heights. It wasn't that she was unaware of Huang Kai's sincerity and intentions. Instead, she knew why he had made all of these sacrifices, but she simply didn't care. However, in this moment she felt a hint of sorrow. Huang Kai had never seen an expression like this on his mistress's face. In his memory, she had always been so silent and aloof, looking as if she were thinking about lofty things that he would never be able to understand. Huang Kai didn't dare to look directly at Li Lu, so he cast his gaze into the distance as he said in a trembling voice, "I am truly very glad that I was able to reunite with you in this lifetime, mistress." Li Lu nodded as she replied, "I'm not as glad as you are, but I'm not unhappy about this either." Both of them were silent for some time. "Don't worry about the mountain and water restriction in that abode from now on," Li Lu said. "You are now the mountain master of Lion Peak, and that abode is no longer a place of cultivation for me, so you don't have to treat it like some sacred place. If there are some fine talents on Lion Peak, then you can send them to cultivate in there once Mr. Chen has left the mountain. Also, feel free to pass down the 3 Dao books that I bestowed upon you to your disciples in accordance with their aptitude and personalities. There's no need to be overly dogmatic in your adherence to rules. Besides, it's not like I ever forbade you from passing down those 3 ancient water techniques. If you weren't so stubborn and pedantic, Lion Peak should have already had a second nascent tier cultivator long ago." Huang Kai slapped himself on the head as he sighed. "It's just as you said, mistress, I have put this big head of mine to waste." Li Lu gave an amused smile, and the two of them fell silent again, looking out at the scenery while enjoying each other's company. 5 days later, Li Er returned to the mountain. For this sparring session, he instructed Chen Pingan to fight him using only his Vajrabadi tier cultivation base as a pure martial artist. However, he wasn't permitted to use any fist techniques. Not even the slightest semblance of a fist technique was permitted. If he were caught breaking this rule, then he would receive a punch at the pinnacle of the 9th tier from Li Er. Furthermore, Li Er mandated that Chen Pingan's punches had to be fast, telling him that he would be doing a disservice to his hard-earned Vajrabadi tier cultivation base by slowing down even in the slightest. At the end of the sparring session, the two of them returned to the dock by boat, and this time it was Li Er driving the boat. He told Chen Pingan that the latter was still not quite there yet, and that he would be returning in 5 more days to resume this process. Unfortunately, Chen Pingan had to turn him down, declaring that he had to go. Qi Jinglong had already made his breakthrough, so he was going to be facing his first challenge soon, and Chen Pingan had to go to the Great Emblem Sword Sect to take a look. From there, he would travel to Ground Lying Peak to visit Spiritual Master Fire Dragon, as well as another good friend of his. After that, he would make a trip to Cave Immortal Street in Sweet Wormwood Nation to visit Li Shisheng, following which he would travel south to return to Skeleton Shoal. Li Er didn't try to impose his will on Chen Pingan. At around dusk, the two of them quickly made their way down the mountain, and on the way down Li Er asked, "If you're in such a hurry to travel to Stalactite Mountain, then why not go straight from the northern complete reed continent instead of making a trip back to the eastern treasured Vile continent? Downtrodden Mountain isn't going anywhere, and Julien and Wei Bo are looking after everything, so there really isn't anything for you to worry about. Once you return to the eastern treasured Vile continent, you'll only be able to take intercontinental ships from Old Dragon City, and that'll be a rather lengthy journey in itself. Isn't all of that a pain in the backside?" Chen Pingan smiled as he replied, "I have to go and pay a visit back home. Otherwise, it'll constantly weigh on my mind everywhere I go." Li Er didn't say anything further. Over these past few days, he had already said far too much, and all of this speaking had been far more exhausting for him than his sparring sessions with Chen Pingan. Upon reaching the fabric shop at the foot of the mountain, they discovered Li Lu helping out inside. Business was very quiet as usual. Chen Pingan was a little hesitant to speak up, but ultimately, he decided to offer her some advice. Miss Li, do you know why business at the shop always seems to struggle when you're here? Li Lu nodded in response. She knew that none of the women in the small town liked to see her. Even if she were willing to swallow her pride and praise the wares sold in the shop to the high heavens, those mortal women would always feel uncomfortable whenever she was around. Even if they were to buy some fabric and make some pretty clothes to enhance their looks, what would be the point? They still couldn't hope to even begin to compare with Li Lu. Li Lu was well aware that her presence was detrimental to business, but she still wanted to spend more time with her mother. You can get 1 or 2 celestial maidens from Lion Peak who aren't quite as good-looking as yourself to come and buy fabric from the shop on 2 separate occasions, Chen Pingan advised with a smile. Make sure to tell them to come around when the street is busy and bustling, and for the first occasion they can buy less fabric, but purchase a bit more the second time. Also, they should be wearing clothes fashioned out of the fabric they bought from the shop during their visits. That way you won't have to worry about the shop's business, and you'll be able to stay in the backyard and chat with Aunt Lu. Thank you for the clever idea, Mr. Chen. I'll be sure to give it a try, Li Lu said with a smile. Earlier, Li Er's wife had noticed Chen Pingan's rather unhealthy complexion, and while bringing some tea to him, the first thing that she asked him was whether he was sick. Chen Pingan hurriedly shook his head with a smile and assured her that he was fine, ailing only from a slight cold. In response, the woman told him some traditional methods from back home to help him recover faster, and she urged him not to be complacent about his health. That day, the 4 of them sat down at the table for a meal. The woman was rather disappointed to learn that Chen Pingan would be leaving the small town following the meal. However, her disappointment immediately turned to delight when Chen Pingan offered to deliver a letter for her to Li Huai at Mountain Cliff Academy. Li Lu turned to Li Er, and the latter merely smiled before taking a sip of wine, one that he thoroughly savored. After the meal, Chen Pingan pulled out some writing supplies. Li Er and his wife were seated together on a long bench beside him, while Li Lu was sitting across the table from him. You dictate while I write, Aunt Lu, Chen Pingan prompted with a smile. Make sure to include a lot of trivial stories and anecdotes in the letter. That way it'll feel like you're actually speaking directly to Li Huai, and he'll be made to feel right at home. Looking at the warm and gentle smile on Chen Pingan's face, the woman was struck by an inexplicable sense of sorrow, and she sighed. If only your parents were still around, Pingan. I'm just a good-for-nothing woman who hasn't seen much of the world and only knows how to run her mouth, but I'm still a mother, after all, and I dare say that no parents under the heavens would be unhappy to have a son like you. Chen Pingan lowered his head to avert his gaze with a tranquil expression, then raised his head again as he smiled and replied, I also wish my parents were still around, Aunt Lu. Unfortunately, I was simply too young back when they passed, and there wasn't much I could do to change anything. Thinking back, this has always been a bit of a sore spot for me. The woman felt very guilty for mentioning such a sensitive and sobering subject out of the blue, and she hurriedly said, All right, I'll begin then, Pingan. I'll just say whatever comes to my mind, and I'll leave it to your discretion to choose what to include in the letter. Go ahead, Aunt Lu, Chen Pingan prompted with a smile. I have plenty of paper here, so you can feel free to dictate to your heart's content. The woman heaved a heavy sigh, then turned to Li Lu with a displeased glare as she snapped, Did you hear that? Whenever I asked you to write a letter to your brother for me in the past, you always stopped after just 1 or 2 sheets of paper. Do you even care for your brother at all? Do you have any respect for your mother? I can't believe I raised such an ungrateful daughter like you. Chen Pingan flashed Li Lu an apologetic smile across the table, and the latter gave a subtle nod to acknowledge his unspoken apology, then turned to her mother as she clasped her fist in an apologetic salute and said, I'm sorry, Mother. From there, the woman began rambling off a stream of consciousness, and Chen Pingan made sure to write down every last word in meticulous detail. The entire time, he sat with a look of concentration on his face and his back ramrod straight. Finally, he hoisted his bamboo bookcase onto his back, then picked up his hiking pole before departing from the shop, while Li Er and his wife stood at the entrance, watching him depart. The woman insisted that Li Lu escort him out of the small town. There was a bag slung across Li Lu's shoulder, one that was filled with items prepared by her mother, most of which were specialty local products from the small town. Of course, also enclosed within were the 3 Dao robes that she had personally mended. Do you think our daughter will be able to find such a good husband for herself in the future? Li Er's wife asked in a quiet voice. It'll be hard, Li Er replied after some thought. The woman immediately stomped down viciously onto Li Er's foot, then began prodding him firmly in the forehead repeatedly as she yelled. So why are you not concerned at all then? You just let him leave like that? I saw you drink a ton of wine, but you're completely useless when it comes to things that actually matter. How did I end up with a husband like you? How did Li Lu end up with a father like you? Are the heavens blind? Or did I do something terrible in my past life to deserve this? Li Er didn't say anything, and of course, he didn't dare to take evasive measures or try to defend himself. The woman heaved a forlorn sigh as she finally relented. She couldn't keep prodding him. Her husband was already an idiot to begin with. If her continued prodding resulted in a further drop in intelligence, then she would be the one to suffer as his wife. Meanwhile, Chen Pingan and Li Lu were walking alongside each other down the street. Huang Kai will take you to the ferry station, and from there, you'll be able to reach the wandering official ferry station near the Great Emblem Sword Sect, Li Lu said. Once you disembark, it'll only be a short journey to the Great Emblem Sword Sect. The first challenger to have visited the Great Emblem Sword Sect was Li Kai of Duckweed Sword Lake. This was all in accordance with the old rules of the Northern Complete Reed Continent, so there's no need for you to concern yourself with such matters. On second thought, I forget that you're a stickler for rules. Chen Pingan shook his head as he replied, Be that as it may, my understanding of the reasoning and logic behind rules is still far too lacking, so while I try to follow the rules, I am far from understanding what true etiquette is. Li Lu offered no response, not wanting to give her opinion on the matter. Do you not ever yearn for pure and absolute freedom, Mr. Chen? Li Lu asked. I do, Chen Pingan replied with a smile. I sometimes find myself envying those who are free and unfettered in everything that they do. However, I've always felt like freedom not built on a foundation of sufficient awareness is ignorant, and will only bring harm to oneself and others. The two of them rounded the corner, and not far up ahead was Huang Kai, who had concealed himself using an illusion technique. Li Lu removed the bag from her shoulder, while Chen Pingan also removed his bamboo bookcase. Li Lu was originally planning to open the bamboo bookcase for him and place the bag inside, but she quickly realized Chen Pingan's reservations, and an amused smile appeared on her face as she asked, Are you worried people would misunderstand? To tell you the truth, everyone in the town has already formed a misunderstanding about our relationship. Chen Pingan placed the bag into the bamboo bookcase before hoisting the ladder onto his back again, and he merely smiled and didn't say anything. There is a mystery capital temple in the heavenly world, which serves as the ancestral origin point of the Taoist sword immortal branch, Li Lu revealed through her mind's lake. The abbot's name is Sun Huizhong, and he's a very open and morally upright person. That's certainly very reassuring to hear from you, Miss Li, Chen Pingan replied. From there, Huang Kai personally escorted Chen Pingan to the ferry station. The two of them made some small talk over the short journey, and after they parted ways, Chen Pingan boarded an immortal ship to the wandering official ferry station. Upon his arrival, he discovered that there were many people there, a good number of whom were traveling to the Great Emblem Sword Sect. This was no surprise considering Lu Jinglong had just emerged from seclusion, and having made a breakthrough, he was going to have to face challenges from 3 formidable sword immortals, namely Li Kai, Dongzhu, and Bai Shang. This was naturally a hot topic of discussion for everyone, and in addition to that, there was also much discourse about the sea of golden clouds that had appeared over Lion Peak, followed by the shower of martial fortune. Everyone was speculating whether Lion Peak had kept a powerful pure martial artist hidden this entire time, or if it had just been some random passerby. Chen Pingan entered his cabin and opened his bamboo bookcase, intending to pull out the 3 Dao robes inside before transferring them into his minimization treasure. However, upon opening the bag, he discovered that in addition to all of the food items and specialty local products that Aunt Lu had prepared for him, there was also a vibrant green jade tablet inside. Li Lu had cast a mountain and water restriction over it to mask its spiritual energy, and that was why Chen Pingan hadn't detected it earlier. He heaved a forlorn sigh at the sight of the jade tablet, feeling as if he had been a terrible guest. Not only had he received so many free meals and free sparring sessions, but he had also just been given an extremely precious gift. The inscriptions on the jade tablet read, "The old flood dragon quells the storm." Chen Pingan stowed the jade tablet away alongside the 3 Tao robes, then resumed the refinement of the spiritual energy in his 3 major acupoints. It proved to be an uneventful journey. Upon his arrival at the wandering official ferry station, which was no more than 150 kilometers away from the Great Emblem Sword sect, Chen Pingan discovered that the place was absolutely packed, filled with people who had come to spectate the imminent battles. As the immortal ship entered the territory of the Great Emblem Sword sect, Chen Pingan sent out a flying sword letter to Qi Jinglong. He didn't see Qi Jinglong on the ship. Instead, he was welcomed by Bai Shou, the young boy originally from Deer Cutter Mountain. Bai Shou raced through the crowd like an agile fish weaving through the water, and as soon as he caught sight of Chen Pingan, he immediately gave him a thumbs up and flashed him a wide grin. "What's gotten you in such a good mood?" Chen Pingan asked in a puzzled manner. Bai Shou burst into laughter as he asked, "You know someone named Su Xingjiu from Cloud Top City, don't you?" "I do," Chen Pingan replied with a smile. Bai Shou was practically rolling with laughter as he chortled. Right now, Lu Jinglong is super busy, and he has to constantly attend to guests and visitors. In fact, he's been forced to turn quite a few people away because he simply doesn't have the time to see everyone. However, when Su Xingjiu came to visit, he claimed to be an acquaintance of yours, so Lu Jinglong decided to grant him an audience. I tagged along and I'm really glad that I did. That guy was carrying a large bamboo bookcase on his back, just like you, and after some small talk he said, "I heard that Mr. Lu is an avid enjoyer of wine, so I've brought with me some wine that I brewed myself at Cloudtop City." Bai Shou was already tearing up from laughter at this point and he howled. You should have seen the look on Lu Jinglong's face. It was like he forgot to bring paper with him to the lavatory. "Su Xingjiu must have misconstrued my words," Chen Pingan said with a resigned sigh. "There must have been some misunderstanding." Bai Shou cupped his fist in a salute as he said in an earnest fashion, "You have my admiration, Chen Pingan. Is your master so busy that he doesn't even have the time to come and welcome me in person?" Chen Pingan asked. "Is that why he sent a little servant like you to come and see me?" "Who are you calling a little servant?" Bai Shou snapped. "Right now, I'm the undisputed #1 prodigy of the Great Emblem Sword sect. Lu Jinglong has to offer incense up to the gods every day behind my back, thanking the heavens that he was blessed with such an exceptional disciple." Chen Pingan patted Bai Shou's head with an amused smile. "Get your hand off me." Bai Shou snapped as he violently jerked his head away. "What do you take me for, some kid? You should be honored that I'm treating you as an equal, so don't push your luck. Otherwise you can go to the Great Emblem Sword sect on your own. I never wanted to serve as your guide anyway." As the two of them reached the Great Emblem Sword sect, Chen Pingan caught sight of Qi Jinglong from afar, standing at the entrance of the sect with a stern expression. Chen Pingan jogged over to him with a wide smile as he praised, "I didn't think you'd be able to make a breakthrough so soon. How impressive. I can't even begin to compare with you, great sword immortal Chen," Qi Jinglong said with a scoff. "I've only made one breakthrough while you've made two, both as a martial artist and as a qi refiner." "You're far too modest," Chen Pingan hurriedly said. "How long are you two going to keep this up for?" Bai Shou snapped. "You start flattering each other as soon as you meet? Is this fun for you? Why don't you start having some drinks together? You love wine, don't you, Lu Jinglong?" Bai Shou was in awe of Su Xingjiu. Upon reaching the thatched cottage on the mountain, the latter had immediately sat down and begun chugging down wine. He downed 2 flagons of wine in succession, and if Lu Jinglong hadn't stopped him, it looked as if he could have easily drunk a third. The flagons were a little small, but it was still very impressive for him to drink with so much sincerity and gusto, particularly considering he had intentionally suppressed his spiritual energy to avoid staving off the effects of the alcohol. The three of them slowly scaled the mountain together, and along the way, Qi Jinglong frequently extended greetings to others, but didn't stop to chat with any of them. "Has Su Xingjiu gone back?" Chen Pingan asked. "He drank so much that he was drunk for an entire day," Qi Jinglong replied in exasperation. "I was finally able to explain the situation to him after he sobered up, and he immediately began drinking again as self-inflicted punishment. Once again I was unable to stop him, so I could only drink with him a second time. Chen Pingan erupted into laughter. Qi Jinglong harumphed coldly. You'd better not pull a stunt like this again. Chen Pingan continued grinning silently to himself as he gently high-fived Bai Shou. The latter was very amused, and he was hoping that Chen Pingan would make frequent visits to the Great Emblem Sword sect in the future. Even if he didn't personally come to visit, it would be very amusing if he sent more people to drink with Lu Jinglong. The Great Emblem Sword sect was an enormous place that was teeming with spiritual energy and filled with countless scenic landmarks. Chen Pingan was incapable of flight, so he pulled out that talismanic boat to travel to Qi Jinglong's place of cultivation. Over at the thatched cottage, Bai Shou pulled out 3 bamboo chairs for everyone to sit on. Can you lend me a grain rain coin? Qi Jinglong suddenly asked. How are you still this poor even when you're in your sect? Chen Pingan asked in a puzzled manner as he tossed Qi Jinglong a grain rain coin. Qi Jinglong caught the grain rain coin and held it between 2 of his fingers. At the same time, he inscribed a talisman in midair with his other hand before tossing the coin into it. After the talisman and the grain rain coin had both faded away, Lu Jinglong explained, the Ancestral Hall disciples of our sect only receive monetary allowances once every 10 years. Of course we can take out loans in case of emergencies, but I'm not a fan of that. I can't even be bothered to return the money that I've borrowed from you. Are you hearing this? Chen Pingan asked as he turned to Bai Shou. Is this something a master should be saying in front of their disciple? Bai Shou was just about to jump in with some mockery of his own, only to notice Lu Jinglong looking at him with a faint smile, and he immediately swallowed his words. I almost fell for your trap. You can just leave whenever you please, but I still have to stay on this mountain and deal with Lu Jinglong every day, so I have to be more careful with my words. Otherwise, Lu Jinglong is going to lecture me until my ears fall off. Go and play somewhere else, Chen Pingan said with a smile. I have some things to discuss with your master. Bai Shou remained firmly rooted in his chair as he sneered. Why do I have to leave? Do you two want to flirt with each other in private or something? Chen Pingan cracked his knuckles as he smiled and exclaimed, I've just come to realize that you're an exceptional martial arts prodigy. It would be a real shame if you didn't pursue martial arts. How about I give you some private training? Why would I become a martial artist when I could become a sword immortal instead? Bai Shou scoffed in disdain, but ultimately still stood up and departed to give Chen Pingan and Lu Jinglong some privacy. The mountain that they were on was called Graceful Peak, and it was a highly sought-after place of cultivation for qi refiners. It was situated between the sect's main peak and secondary peak, and every year during spring and autumn, a phenomenon would occur, during which spiritual energy would surge toward Graceful Peak like the tide. What made this spiritual energy particularly desirable was that it was interspersed with wisps of pure sword intent, and any qi refiner cultivating on the peak could reap cultivation benefits without even doing anything. The peak had been vacant ever since the passing of the Great Emblem Sword sect's second leader. Once upon a time, an unpolished jade-tier sword immortal had offered to become a guest elder of the Great Emblem Sword sect so long as he was permitted to reside on Graceful Peak, but his offer was turned down. In Bai Shou's eyes, it was downright inexplicable that Lu Jinglong had been so reluctant to move from the ancestral mountain of the Great Emblem Sword sect to Graceful Peak. According to him, he had grown accustomed to staying in the old residence on the ancestral mountain. It was only the constant nagging from the ancestral hall after he reached the nascent tier that convinced him to finally make the move. Yet even after he moved to Graceful Peak, all he did was build a shoddy thatched cottage instead of establishing an actual manor. He had still been in seclusion during the spring earlier in the year. In the past, all of the disciples of the Great Emblem Sword sect had been permitted to come to Graceful Peak every year to split the spiritual energy, but they didn't dare to do so this year, as Graceful Peak was no longer vacant. Bai Shou was sent to the ancestral hall to relay Lu Jinglong's wishes to a benevolent-looking old ancestor, and it was only then that the young disciples of the sect came flocking to the mountain again in spring. However, in contrast with the past rowdy gatherings, everyone cultivated in silence on this occasion out of respect for Lu Jinglong. At the time, Bai Shou had also been on the mountain, and he had been just as silent as everyone else, sitting with his arms crossed in a completely still fashion for a day and a night atop a small stool in the thatched cottage. In light of this behavior, he had come across as rather strange to all of the young cultivators of the Great Emblem Sword sect. Following Bai Shou's departure, Chen Pingan gave Qi Jinglong a brief recount of his journey thus far. He didn't omit any events, but some were recounted in more detail than others. After patiently listening to Chen Pingan's story, Qi Jinglong began offering his own insights, and it was as if the two of them were reviewing a game of Go together. On the subject of He Xiaoyang's history with the Jade Forest sect, Bai Shang and Su Xian, Qi Jinglong said, "There have been no stories of this in the ordinary newspapers so far, but in reality, Heavenly Lord Xiesher has already returned to his sect. Not only was He Xiaoyang reprimanded by him for her run-in with the Jade Forest sect, but she was also immediately sent there to apologize, and she promptly went into seclusion upon her return to the sect. From that point onward, the esteemed mystery department Yang clan of the Great Origin Empire, the Water Dragon sect and Duckweed Sword Lake, who've always had ties with one another, also sent people to visit the Refreshing sect. The Lofty Cloud Palace sent Yang Ningxing. The Water Dragon sect sent Xiao Jingji, while sect leader Li Kai made a personal visit herself. In light of all of that, the Jade Forest sect is put into a rather awkward position regardless of what Su Xian thinks. I've heard that Bai Shang will be personally coming to the Great Emblem Sword sect to challenge you. Does that mean that this is a good thing for you then?" Chen Pingan asked with slightly furrowed brows. Qi Jinglong smiled and nodded as he replied, "Bai Shang has always been very proud, so given his cultivation base and seniority, he was never going to pick on a newly ascended unpolished jade-tier cultivator like myself. Hence, even if all of that hadn't happened, it would have still been good news for me that he was willing to take up one of the 3 challenger spots. On top of that, just as you guessed, Bai Shang really is facing some pressure right now, leaving him with no choice but to try and befriend our Great Emblem Sword sect. There's no lack of Sword Immortal seniors on the northern complete reed continent who don't like the look of me, so by taking up one of the 3 challenger spots, he's doing our sect a favor. With the lineup of Li Kai, Dongzhu and Bai Shang confirmed, I have nothing to worry about. I will only stand to benefit immensely from their 3 challenges, and my life won't be in any danger." "That's brilliant news," Chen Pingan said with a smile. "How about we have some wine to celebrate?" To his surprise, Qi Jinglong nodded in response and extended a hand. Chen Pingan pulled out 2 flagons of rice wine with a perplexed expression as he asked, "Have you undergone some drastic change in personality after your breakthrough?" Qi Jinglong took one of the flagons of wine with a smile as he explained, "This is not to celebrate our respective breakthroughs. Instead, it's to celebrate the fact that we've been able to meet again at all." Indeed, Chen Pingan's journey along the Great River had not been easy, nor had Qi Jinglong's breakthrough. The fact that the two of them had been reunited here, safe and well, was more worthy of celebration than the breakthroughs that they had made, and that was why Qi Jinglong was willing to have this drink. The 2 of them gently touched their flagons as they exchanged a smile, then drank in silence, needing no words. "The cultivation world isn't really all it's cut out to be," Chen Pingan suddenly sighed. "At least the wine is a bright spot," Qi Jinglong chuckled. It appeared that Bai Shou had departed, but he hadn't actually gone very far, and he had been eavesdropping on the conversation between the 2 this entire time. He shuddered delicately as he complained, "Why is a pair of grown men like them being so lovey-dovey with each other? Could it be that there really is something going on between them?" At the same time, he was astounded by Chen Pingan's stories. Even though his cultivation base was still nothing special, his experiences and abilities were far from ordinary, and he was already remarking on the fists of 10th-tier martial artists as if he were talking casually about wine. "Looks like I'm going to have to be more polite and respectful when I talk to him from now on, and I also have to show a bit more sincerity when I refer to him as a brother. That way, once he simultaneously becomes a golden core tier earth immortal and a 9th or 10th tier martial artist, I'll have a powerful ally to call upon in my time of need." All of a sudden, Qi Jinglong's voice rang out beside his ears. "You've been eavesdropping on us for quite a while now. What do you think? Do you want to have some wine as well?" "Wine is not for me," Bai Shou refused in a serious voice. "Drinking wine at such a young age will only hinder my cultivation." Chen Pingan chuckled. "As expected of your disciple, Qi Jinglong. He's almost as two-faced and opportunistic as my first-ever disciple." Bai Shou was rather disgruntled to hear this. He could stomach being called two-faced and opportunistic, but the notion that he was inferior to someone else even in these 2 regards was too much of an insult for him to bear. "What's your disciple's name, Chen Pingan?" he asked loudly. "Tell him that I, by show of graceful pique, will be challenging him when I get the chance. It can be a contest of anything. A debate, a sword fight, a fist fight, a battle of mystical abilities. I'm happy to go along with whatever he chooses. A debate may be feasible, but a fight isn't going to be plausible for now," Chen Pingan said with a smile. "Right now, this disciple of mine is still attending school. He should count himself very fortunate then." Bai Shou harumphed before departing. Unbeknownst to Bai Shou, the bold declaration that he had made on this day would earn him countless beatings in the future. It was truly a painful lesson in how disastrous a loose tongue could prove to be, but that was a story for another time. After finishing his flagon of wine, Chen Pingan rose to his feet as he said, "I've heard that you're really busy at the moment, so I won't take up any more of your time. You still have 3 battles to fight, and I have to continue on my journey." Qi Jinglong didn't try to keep him, and he seemed to have already been prepared for Chen Pingan's visit, pulling a book out of his sleeve as he said, "Enclosed within are some of my insights pertaining to cultivation for swordsmen. You can read through it when you get some spare time." Chen Pingan tucked the book up his sleeve then asked, "Will there be trouble if I travel by talismanic boat in your Great Emblem Sword sect?" Qi Jinglong chuckled. "I didn't think you were aware that you were in the Great Emblem Sword sect." Chen Pingan feigned a surprised expression as he exclaimed, "You sure talk big now that you're an upper 5-tier sword immortal. I wouldn't dare to say anything like this on Downtrodden Mountain." From there, Chen Pingan returned to the wandering official ferry station on his talismanic boat, and from there, he was going to travel to the ground-lying peak to visit Zhang Shanfeng. Prior to departing, he called out to Bai Shou, who was taking a stroll on Graceful Peak, yelling, "Your master owes me a grain rain coin. Make sure to remind him of that from time to time." Bai Shou was just thinking to himself that he had to be more polite and respectful around Chen Pingan in the future, but he was unable to suppress the urge to raise his middle finger. Over at the thatched cottage, Qi Jinglong gave a nod of approval. It seemed that his disciple was standing up for him. On the many mountains of the Great Emblem Sword sect, many female cultivators were gathered in small groups, chatting spiritedly among themselves. In contrast to their male counterparts, who were all speculating about Chen Pingan's cultivation base and background, all of the female cultivators were curious about Chen Pingan's physical appearance and disposition. This was a young man that Lu Jinglong had seen fit to come out and welcome in person, so he had to have been a very esteemed guest. One of the women had seen the two scale the mountain from afar, and she reluctantly revealed to everyone that the visitors' looks were nothing special. All of the other women immediately began groaning collectively, feeling as if the visitor were undeserving of a personal audience with Lu Jinglong. Of course, Qi Jinglong had no idea about the absurd sentiments being espoused by the juniors of his sect. Even if he were to overhear their conversations, he would undoubtedly be unable to understand their logic. He would most likely have to consult Chen Pingan in order to understand what they were talking about. Upon his return to the thatched cottage, Bai Shou asked, "He left just like that? Does he even regard you as a friend at all?" "You'll come to learn the answer to that question once you have friends of your own in the future," Qi Jinglong replied with a smile. "What do you mean?" Bai Shou protested. "Chen Pingan is my friend. We've drunk together, we refer to each other as brothers, Let's go to the ancestral hall together," Qi Jinglong interrupted. Bai Shou immediately wilted like a parched plant under the hot sun. "Can we go tomorrow instead?" Qi Jinglong didn't say anything. Bai Shou could only reluctantly go to the ancestral hall with Qi Jinglong. Unbeknownst to Chen Pingan, Zhang Shanfeng had already departed on a journey with his senior brother, Yuan Lingdian. In Zhang Shanfeng's absence, Chen Pingan was welcomed by the master of the White Cloud Peak, an old immortal with the demeanor of a transcendent being, who personally came to apologize to him. After learning that spiritual master Fire Dragon was still sleeping, Chen Pingan decided not to scale the mountain. Instead, he was going to visit some other time and apologize to the old spiritual master for visiting and leaving unannounced. The master of the White Cloud Peak personally escorted Chen Pingan all the way to the ferry station, and only then did he return to the mountain. Chen Pingan boarded a ship to the Spring Dew Garden, leaning against the railing with a dazed look on his face. Once he reached the Spring Dew Garden, he would be able to travel directly to Skeleton Shoal, the southernmost point on the northern complete reed continent. However, along the way, he had to make a stop at Sweet Wormwood Nation. This was a small nation without an immortal ferry station, so he would have to travel for hundreds of kilometers on foot. At the moment, Li Shixing was staying on a street called Cave Immortal Street in one of the nation's provincial cities. Unbeknownst to Chen Pingan, not long after his departure from the Great Emblem Sword sect, Cui Dongshan boarded an intercontinental ship that was returning to the Flax Robe sect, and Skeleton Shoal was his intended destination. The teacher was making a southbound return journey, while the student was traveling northward. The first thing that Cui Dongshan did after arriving at Skeleton Shoal was to tear open the heavens of the malicious Ghost Valley small world, before raining down a torrent of immortal treasures upon Skeleton Wall City. Immediately thereafter, he stowed his immortal treasures away before fleeing the scene. For some reason, Gao Cheng didn't retaliate or try to pursue him. In the wake of the attack, Gao Cheng was seated on his white bone throne in a suit of armor, his brows tightly furrowed. He didn't know why, but the sense of unease that he had been feeling intermittently had become a lot clearer and more pronounced once he saw Cui Dongshan. Not only did he not recklessly tear open the heavens again with his Tao manifestation, but he was also struck by an inexplicable sense of hindrance, as if some type of restriction had been placed upon him. In Mural City, at the foot of Wood Garment Mountain, Cui Dongshan was trying to purchase a divine maiden portrait. He put on a pitiable display while bartering with a young girl, telling her that he was an impoverished young scholar who was on a very tight budget, but he was truly enamored with the portrait and was determined to purchase it even if it meant having to skip a few meals. The girl was fooled by his sincere and earnest display, and it looked as if he would burst into tears if she denied him any longer, so she could only cave to his request and offer him a discounted price. To her astonishment, as soon as the discount was offered, Cui Dongshan immediately declared in an ecstatic fashion, "I'll purchase all of the portraits in your entire shop at that price." Before the girl had a chance to collect herself, Cui Dongshan turned to discover sect leader Zhu Quan of the Flax Robe sect standing not far away. There was a faint smile on her face as she remarked, "You sure have a large appetite, young man." Cui Dongshan crossed his arms, holding his bamboo hiking pole to his chest as he replied, "Of course. I'm my teacher's most prized student after all. Who are you, big sister?" "Your teacher?" Zhu Quan asked as she gazed upon the hiking pole with a peculiar expression. "Is his surname Chan?" A vibrant smile appeared on Cui Dongshan's face as he exclaimed, "You must be a clairvoyant immortal big sister. But I never heard him mention you," Zhu Quan jibed. To her surprise, Cui Dongshan's face instantly puckered up as he burst into tears, leaving Zhu Quan scratching her head with a puzzled expression. He seemed to have been thoroughly enjoying himself bombarding Skeleton Wall City just now, yet all of a sudden, he was weeping like a distraught child. Chen Pingan disembarked from the immortal ship mid-journey to travel to the rather reclusive Sweet Wormwood Nation. He chose to stick exclusively to secluded mountain paths over the journey of several hundred kilometers, traveling day and night as fast as the wind. It didn't take him long to find the provincial city, and he had only just made his way onto Cave Immortal Street when the doors of a house were opened, following which a young man emerged from within, waving at him with a smile. Chen Pingan was momentarily dazed at the sight of the young man, but then quickly collected himself and strode over to the house. Li Shixing made his way down the steps, and Chen Pingan extended a respectful bow as he greeted, "Mr. Li." Li Shixing smiled and responded in kind. Cui Ci was standing inside the entrance of the residence, watching the reunion between the two young men, and he was very happy to see the bright smile that had appeared on his teacher's face. Ever since they arrived on the northern complete reed continent, it felt to him like his teacher had been constantly contemplating things with his brows furrowed. Even when his brows were unfurrowed, it felt like there were still many things on his mind, but at this moment, it looked like he wasn't thinking about anything other than purely basking in the joy of the moment. Li Shixing led Chen Pingan into his residence, then turned around with a smile as he remarked, "I almost didn't recognize you. I feel like that's what I'll be thinking when I see little Baoping at the academy next time," Chen Pingan said with a chuckle. They entered Li Shixing's study, which wasn't very large, and there weren't many books inside either, nor were there extra writing utensils or artwork and calligraphy pieces. Li Shixing told Cui Ci to go read on his own, then sat down behind his desk across from Chen Pingan. Very good, Li Shixing remarked with a nod. You seem more steadfast and focused. Chen Pingan scratched his head. There are some things that I didn't see fit to tell you in the past, but it's about time we had those conversations now, Li Shixing continued with a smile. Chen Pingan immediately sat up even straighter as he prompted. Please enlighten me, Mr. Li. I've always been someone who hasn't ever had a very clear grasp on myself, Li Shixing said. Chen Pingan hesitated momentarily, then replied, I'm the same. No, we're not quite the same, Li Shixing disagreed with a smile and a shake of his head. Do you still recall how I once wanted to give you a peachwood talisman? Chen Pingan nodded lightly in response. Before that, I fought against the swordsman Chao Jun on Clay Vase Alley, right? Li Shixing recalled. You really had that Chao Jun very frustrated, Chen Pingan said with an amused smile. It's very difficult for qi refiners to cultivate in the jewel's small world, yet I was able to progress through the tiers very quickly, Li Shixing said. So quickly that even the likes of Ma Kuxuan couldn't really compare with me. Chen Pingan remained silent, waiting for Li Shixing to continue, and continue he did. It's only after the event that I was able to uncover the underlying reason behind my rapid progression through extensive contemplation, Li Shixing revealed. I discovered that the fortune, or in other words the great Tao-fated opportunity, that belonged to you actually ended up befalling me. Just like you, I've always felt like there's an equilibrium to everything under the heavens. If someone gains, then someone else stands to lose and vice versa. Nothing simply increases or disappears without an equal and opposite effect. Chen Pingan opened his mouth to speak, but Li Shixing raised a hand to stop him as he urged. Let me finish. The ways that we think and act are quite similar. If we find out something, then we have to do something about it, and only then will we feel at ease. In the past, I didn't know that I had taken your fortune, but as my cultivation base and powers increased, I was able to retrace everything step by step to uncover the truth. Now that the truth has been revealed to me, I can't just accept this outcome without giving anything in exchange. Even now, try as I might, I am still unable to glean the secrets of that peachwood talisman, but what's clear to me is that the talisman is most definitely very important to me, and that's precisely why I wanted to give it to you. I have taken something very significant of yours, and I must reciprocate with something equal in value in order to restore equilibrium and make my heart feel at ease. Just because my cultivation base was superior to yours at the time and the peachwood talisman was very important to me doesn't mean that those two things were not equal in value, and it does not mean that I should give something else to you instead. I took the foundation of your great Tao, so it's only right that I give the foundation of my great Tao to you. Only then will it be a fair exchange. However, you refused to accept the peachwood talisman at the time, so I could only back down. I was speaking of this to Senior Li Heir of Lion Peak the other time. I told him that if you came to me with gratitude in your heart, whether it be for the talismans that I gave you or the runes that I inscribed upon the bamboo building, then it would only be a bother for both of us, and in that case I would rather not see you at all. Chen Pingan nodded in response with a tranquil expression. Li Shixing smiled as he continued. As for the authentic death-avoiding book and those pieces of talisman paper, those things do not factor into my compensation to you. Instead, they are my gifts to you as a gesture of gratitude for escorting little Baoping all the way to the great Sui nation. Chen Pingan nodded once again. All of a sudden, a hint of dejection appeared on Li Shixing's face as he asked, Are you not curious about why both Li Baoping and my brother Li Baozhen have the Bao character in their names, yet I alone do not? Li Shixing, Li Baozhen, Li Baoping. I've never thought about it, Chen Pingan replied with a shake of his head. During their journey to the great Sui nation, Li Baoping had kept no secrets from her beloved junior uncle, and she had told Chen Pingan that her mother seemed to have a preference for Li Baozhen over her eldest son, Li Shixing. However, this was a private matter of the Li clan, so Chen Pingan didn't pry for further details. Li Shixing rose to his feet, then strode over to the window and cast his gaze into the distance. During every spring festival, there was an unofficial tradition at the Li clan, which involved Li Shixing's mother asking the servants and maidservants of the manor to recite some idioms and poetry that included the Li character. Even when one of the children inadvertently recited an idiom that had slightly negative connotations, their mother wasn't displeased, and she still gave them their New Year's money. However, the smile instantly vanished from her face at the mention of the idiom, a peach for a plum. one and her reaction to the subsequently recited idiom of the peach tree withers in the place of the plum tree, was one of downright fury, an emotion that had never been seen in the benevolent and friendly woman up to that point. At the time, Li Shixing had only been a young boy, and he just so happened to have witnessed this scene from a nearby corridor. He had been quite perplexed by his mother's reaction, but he suppressed his curiosity as he didn't feel it was appropriate to ask questions. Initially, he didn't think much of this, but the memory stayed with him, tinged by a subtle hint of unease. Li Shixing turned to Chen Pingan and revealed, "Living across from me is a family with the Chen surname. One of its members is a Confucian scholar, a few years older than Li Baozhen. His name is Chen Baozhou, and if you meet him, you'll come to understand why I was able to claim the fortune that rightfully belonged to you." There was no need for Chen Pingan to go and meet this Chen Baozhou. He already understood everything from Li Shixing's story. "I'm fine," Li Shixing suddenly assured with a smile. Northern Complete Reed Continent, Cave Immortal Street, Chen Shixing. Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, Jewel Small World, Li Baozhou. That was how it should have been. This also explained why a model tree, which symbolized wisdom and morality, had grown out of the Chen clan ancestral grave deep in that mountain. It was because Mr. Li should have been Mr. Chen instead. "There are many things that I still can't figure out," Li Shixing sighed. "It's just like how there are countless illusions and obstacles in life, ones that can only be overcome once a sufficient cultivation base is reached." Chen Pingan rose to his feet and said, "I agree that you should be sad, but I don't think it's justified for you to be this sad." Li Shixing smiled as he turned to Chen Pingan with a pair of bright and clear eyes and said, "I have truly been consoled by your words." Chen Pingan also smiled in response, and from there, Li Shixing suggested that the two of them play a game of Go. They chatted casually with one another during the game, and as usual, Chen Pingan played very slowly, only contributing a sentence or two to the conversation each time after he set down a stone. "Before coming to the Northern Complete Reed Continent, I was actually quite afraid. I had heard that there were many swordsmen here, and that everyone in both the cultivation world and the martial arts world acted in a very reckless and unrestrained fashion. I thought a free and lawless place like this would be perfect to put me in a better mental state, only to discover that so long as my mental hurdle wasn't overcome, I would continue to be stuck in the mud. I was also afraid that I would go from one extreme to the other, so I gave myself the alias of Chen Haoran. It wasn't a joke. It was a constant reminder to myself that even though I've come to a renowned place of lawlessness, I mustn't allow myself to truly throw caution to the wind and act without regard for consequences. At the same time, I felt like the name also represented a subconscious yearning of mine, a desire to truly be a good person. You are someone who recognizes that you possess evil and selfish thoughts, yet are still able to do good deeds," Li Shixing said. "Do you know what this entails, Chen Pingan?" Chen Pingan shook his head in response. Li Shixing picked up a go stone, then gently set it down onto the board as he continued. "This is the self-awareness and self-restraint that us Confucians constantly champion and strive to achieve." Chen Pingan shook his head, feeling unworthy of such high praise. Li Shixing didn't speak any further on the subject, returning his attention to the game at hand as he continued. "Having said that, your play is still as terrible as ever. I'll admit that I don't have much talent when it comes to Go," Chen Pingan conceded. "Is that truly the case?" Li Shixing asked with a smile. Chen Pingan nodded as he replied, "It's because I don't have an eye for the bigger picture. I can never bring myself to sacrifice any territory for the so-called greater good. Everyone is playing their own game of Go in life," Li Shixing said. "There are many smart people who see many steps ahead and constantly have an eye on the bigger picture. So there's no need for you to strive to see the bigger picture if that's not your strong suit." "I have truly been consoled by your words, Mr. Li," Chen Pingan said with a smile. "My words come straight from the heart, while your words come from a place of flattery," Li Shixing said with a shake of his head. "Not at all," Chen Pingan denied. "Everyone from our downtrodden mountain values sincerity above all else." Li Shixing chuckled. "I'm sure you do." However, Chen Pingan's smile had suddenly become a little forced. Li Shixing heaved an internal sigh, knowing that Chen Pingan's thoughts had most likely wandered to the bamboo building on Downtrodden Mountain. Even though he was still present, it was as if his mind had drifted away on a long journey. The immortal ship traveled from north to south, passing through the Great Seal Script Empire, the Golden Gate Nation, and the Orchid Residence Nation in that order before reaching the Talisman Water Ferry Station of the Spring Dew Garden. By then it was already autumn, and Chen Pingan had missed yet another annual spring farewell banquet. Compared with last time, the Talisman Water Ferry Station was much quieter. Spring was when the Spring Dew Garden was most busy and bustling. As Chen Pingan disembarked from the ship, his whole getup was just about identical to the previous year, except the bamboo bookcase had taken the place of Sword Immortal on his back. He traveled straight to Old Locust Street, which was much busier and livelier than the ferry station. A faint smile appeared on his face as his Pai Fu shop came into view, and he removed his conical bamboo hat before making his way inside. There were no customers in the shop, and that left him feeling a little concerned. The young cultivator from the Nightglow Grass Hall, who was serving as a stand-in shopkeeper, had already emerged from behind the counter with a smile on his face. After identifying Chen Pingan, the smile on his face widened even further, and he hurriedly cupped his fist in a salute as he bowed and greeted. Wang Tingfang pays his respects to the shop owner. It came as a bit of a surprise to him that Chen Pingan had returned so soon. After all, it was very common for cultivators to embark on journeys spanning decades at a time. Chen Pingan cupped his fist to return the salute as he said, "Thank you for your hard work, shopkeeper Wang. Should I bring you the account books?" Wang Tingfang asked. For businessmen, talking business was always preferable to any small talk. Chen Pingan nodded in response, and the two of them made their way behind the counter together. Chen Pingan removed the bamboo bookcase from his back, then set his conical bamboo hat down onto his hiking pole. Wang Tingfang pulled out 2 account books, and Chen Pingan's concern abated slightly upon seeing this. If business really was that terrible, then surely there wouldn't have been enough transactions to warrant 2 account books, right? Chen Pingan had already glanced through the shelves in the shop, so he had a rough idea of what had been sold. As he flipped through the account books, one particular transaction caught his attention and he exclaimed, "Someone actually paid such an exorbitant price to purchase that pair of immortal treasure crowns?" After looking at the date of sale, a peculiar look appeared on Chen Pingan's face as he asked, "Were they purchased by a young woman with a Five Mountain Nation accent, accompanied by a sword-carrying servant?" "How did you know?" Wang Tingfang exclaimed in astonishment. Chen Pingan heaved a resigned sigh, and he didn't reveal to Wang Tingfang that those two were Sui Jingcheng and the nascent tier swordsman of Duckweed Sword Lake, Rong Chong. Instead, he merely shook his head as he lamented, "If it was those two, then you could have sold the crowns for a bit more." An uneasy look appeared on Wang Tingfang's face upon hearing this. "It's fine, you already did very well, shopkeeper Wang," Chen Pingan said with a smile as he continued flipping through the pages of the account books. "Don't mind me, I was just spouting nonsense because I'm relatively familiar with those two, but I wouldn't have actually charged them so much just because I know them. There's no way I would have been able to sell the crowns for the price that you did if I had been personally overseeing the sale." While reading through the account books, Chen Pingan chatted casually with Wang Tingfang about the recent events that had transpired in the Spring Dew Garden and the Nightglow Grass Hall. "It was only thanks to the shop's connection to you that I was able to sell the pair of crowns, and that made last year's figures look very good, but it didn't have much to do with me," Wang Tingfang said with a smile. "I implore you not to reveal the truth to my master. Otherwise, I'm going to be sent packing from the Pai Fu shop for sure. My master has been keeping a very close eye on the business in this shop, and at the end of every season, he personally summons me to report to him about the shop's earnings." Chen Pingan nodded as he replied, "I've brought some tea leaves from the Rainbow Sparrow residence with me this time, and I'll be personally visiting Immortal Tang to express my gratitude. The shop has been run far better than I imagined, and if I have your blessings to do so, I would like to offer up some glowing praise about you to your master." Wang Tingfang took 2 steps back, then extended a deep bow of gratitude as he said, "I am forever indebted to you, shop owner. I will be sure to continue working diligently to earn even more money for the Pai Fu shop." Chen Pingan closed the first account book, and he didn't even bother to flip through the second one. Wang Tingfang had just told him that the Nightglow Grass Hall was overseeing the earnings of the shop, so if he were to continue meticulously inspecting the accounts books, then that would be a rather insulting gesture, implying that he didn't trust the Nightglow Grass Hall's work. He slid the pair of account books toward Wang Tingfang with a smile as he said, I can see that the records in these account books are very accurate, clear, and detailed. You've done a great job. From here onward, there's no need to try to strive excessively to make the shop's annual figures look good. I'm happy as long as we can turn a steady and consistent profit over time. It doesn't have to be anything spectacular. After I leave the Spring Dew Garden on this occasion, the shop will most likely have to fall under your care for many more years, so please continue to look after it well. Wang Tingfang smiled and assured Chen Pingan that he would do just that, then carefully put the account books away, locking them into a drawer. Chen Pingan turned around and pulled out 2 items from his bamboo bookcase, namely the jade bracelet that displayed the fire and water phenomenon and a bronze antique mirror, the replica mirror that bore the valuable inscription of Made by the Gong clan. Both of these items had been given to him by the martial artist, Huang Shi, along with the tree gall pot and the abstinence plaque. Thinking back to that adventurous foray into the immortal abode, he and Huang Shi had started off on less than friendly terms, but by the time they parted ways, things had certainly become much more cordial between them. The tree gall pot wasn't particularly precious, but spiritual master Huan Yun had explicitly stated that it could aid a qi refiner in absorbing wood attribute spiritual energy, thereby making it an extremely valuable asset for Chen Pingan, who was currently in the process of refining his 3rd wood attribute bonded item. Over the course of his southbound journey, he had used the refining 3 mountains mantra imparted upon him by spiritual master Fire Dragon to refine the pot into an auxiliary treasure in the major acupoint that served as the home to his wood residence. As for the abstinence plaque, Chen Pingan was planning to refine that into his wood residence as well. However, the refinement of treasures was a very time-consuming process. Every day, he had to spend 12 hours refining the water fortune in the bricks he had taken from the Taoist temple, and it was already a testament to his work ethic that he was still able to successfully complete standard refinement of the tree gall pot outside of that. Over the course of his past few journeys by immortal ship, he had spent virtually all of his free time on artifact refinement. Chen Pingan set the jade bracelet and antique mirror down onto the table, then gave Wang Tingfang a brief explanation of their origins and properties. Seeing as the 2 crowns have been sold, our shop is now missing the 2 standout treasures that once served as its main attraction, so these 2 treasures can take their place. However, make sure you don't actually sell them. If anyone tries to purchase them, just state an absurd price that no one would reasonably pay for them. Essentially, they're only going to serve as display items to attract Earth immortals to our shop. We already don't have the biggest shop, so we need some premium items to serve as attractions and draw in customers. Wang Tingfang smiled and nodded in agreement, then carefully stowed the 2 items away as he said, I'm going to purchase 2 of the finest wooden display boxes the Spring Dew Garden has to offer. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing justice to these 2 precious treasures. There's no need to report to me on such minor decisions, shopkeeper Wang, Chen Pingan said with a smile. I trust the business acumen of the Nightglow Grass Hall, and I have faith in your integrity as well. Wang Tingfang extended another bow of gratitude.